All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Break the Rules live stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, and we are here today to talk about whether the right has gone into a very bad state of affairs, whether it's become like a snake eating its own tail with the grifting and the edginess, not necessarily lending it to building good government. Whether we're going to see some bad things down the road, like a potential president AOC coming to the fore, as the reaction to the reaction that's going on right now. And this was inspired by River Page over here, who is a reporter for the Free Press. It is the very first time you're here, River. Thank you so much for coming in. And of course, we have the absolutely fabulous Dave Greene, a man of many talents, one of the biggest figures on the right, and this is why I think it's very important, because River, and I know, Dave, we talked about this before, where it's like, all right, we're going to have another one of these, bringing
Maybe
people
I'm one
who
of
are
the
more,
oldest.
yeah. Well, we're going to have a thing where we bring in people who are more from a liberal perspective, but not, a super woke perspective, and really get to what is the elephant in the room here? What is the big disagreement? Because I think you are both reasonable people, and maybe we can discover some things here. But this was inspired by River Page's article for the Free Press, a pretty recent one, and I would love for us to start out with you, River, talking a little bit about that. And also, just so you guys know, this is simultaneously broadcast on YouTube as well as X Spaces. So for all the people here who are on Spaces right now, if you want to see us in our full visual glory, as well as help support bring people together through Break the Rules, go into the YouTube link in the Jumbotron right now, smash that subscribe button, smash that like button, click the bell, do all of that good stuff, and I'm going to be in your eternal graces. Anyway, River, you've got the floor, my friend.
All right. Yeah, so my piece was basically sorry, this echo is fucking me up. The piece was talking about the online right's cultural ascendancy, particularly on Twitter, X now, I guess. Which is, and I start off by explaining that it's gotten really bad. It's gotten really ugly. Like people are like talking about anti-miscegenation. They're saying crazy shit about Jews. It's standard sort of like what used to be kind of like 4chan fare. But now it's being circulated by these really, really huge accounts that have bigger followings than like most mainstream like conservative TV shows or, news publications, whatever. So this is really like the future of right-wing media, and it's becoming like very, very extreme. The guy who owns the site is basically running the government, and elites from across the political spectrum, but especially the right, political elites, cultural elites, so forth, are sort of enmeshed in this culture every day. They go online, they spend tons of their time there, and like it affects the way they see the world. And my theory is that the right is gotten high on its own supply, and it's doing much something very similar to what the left did in the 2010s when they were culturally ascendant, when they had platforms like Twitter to themselves because all the right-wing people were banned. Even, people who weren't saying, crazy genocidal things or like threatening people or whatever, just they banned like the Babylon Bee for making like a trans joke, right? So like there was no pushback whatsoever. And so what happened then was that the left had to start going at each other and cultivating this increasingly extreme party line on things like race, gender, so forth. And they built this monster basically that through that was like kind of like filtered through the through mainstream media, through liberal politics, and like presented finally like 2 or 3 years after you saw it all like developing on Twitter to the public, and the public reacts like very negatively. They freak out. It's the monster scares the normies, and then you get a second Trump win. So this is like kind of my theory of like how it's going, or like how things went for the left. And I think a very similar thing is happening to the right, where they found themselves in a elite bubble, or an internet bubble that the elites are present on. Let's say that. Much in the same way that Twitter, old sort of like left-wing Twitter did. And they are becoming increasingly insane, and it's going to weird people out. So that was basically my whole point.
Dave, what say you?
So, I mean, all the stuff that we're saying on Twitter right now was essentially things that mainstreamed themselves over the early 2010s during the height of censorship on places like 4chan. The big thing about this is that there is no symmetry between the left and the right on any of these things. This is something that I think it's very, very apparent that the left and the right function in different media environments. The left likes essentially to have the censorship regime of the existing American government, or what we used to call the cathedral back in the day. It is the philosophy of the professional managerial class, and it thrives on highly moderated forums like Reddit, like Blue Sky, et cetera, like Facebook back in the day. The right likes highly dysregulated forums because it essentially, it's not even really one thing. It's a variety of different ideas that different parties wanted to move in that were sort of all kind of verboten by the main liberal professional managerial class. Like a good example of this is, I know you've had these people on a lot, Lev, but like paganism. Like paganism is huge now on X, but like it's not like I'm incredibly anti-pagan. It's just that this kind of like, blood and soil paganism happens also to be hated by the professional managerial class, and so does my more conservative Roman Catholicism, and so we're all in the same place.
It's the island of broken toys, in other words.
Yeah, I guess so. And it's true that I really haven't been on Twitter very much. It just seemed kind of, I got off of it for Lent, but it was getting to the point where discourse was kind of being killed off, and it's always been kind of a hell site, to borrow kind of progressive term for the platform. And now I'm broadcasting on there right now, so it's ironic. But I think that the problem is there's just no symmetry to this relationship. The problem, the central problem that we're experiencing right now is not some kind of like equal and opposite force that is the right wing coming into power. What you're seeing right now is the post-war consensus and the liberal order disintegrating, and then people trying to figure out what comes next. You say that Elon Musk is in charge of the government. They're trying to take over the government. They are nowhere near in charge of the government yet, despite having the presidency. The unelected government is still, the vast majority of them are affiliated with the Democrat Party and have the philosophy of the PMC. So, the problem also, the underlying problem with this, the reason why, in your article, you invoked kind of the pendulum swinging back and forth. That implies that there's some kind of rational center. The reason why we're experiencing these ideological disruptions is that the center no longer makes any sense anymore. It's completely unsustainable. If we look at any of the large problems we have on our horizon, they necessitate some break with the assumptions of the liberal order of the past. And so the question really isn't, is the right going to go too far? I'm sure there's going to be a backlash. There's probably going to be a backlash in a year, if not sooner, to the Trump administration. And they're going to hit some roadblock, and then, politics will begin again, and we'll see who wins the next election cycle. But the bigger question is who can consolidate some kind of consensus to take on the larger systematic problems with our culture. Because our culture has become completely incoherent over the last 20 years, and our financial system has been incoherent for the last 40 years. So something major needs to change, and it can't be in that kind of neoliberal direction we've been comfortable moving in for since the 90s.
Yeah.
And that's a question that's going to involve reintegrating some ideas that people consider scary or that they don't like. But that's the reality of the time. And
like what ideas?
There's no solution to. Here's one. Here's one that, obviously I'm going to go to this one because it's like a primary one in my own mind right now. Almost, this is directly linked to the financial one. So it's a great example. Right now, almost all major governments are having an enormous time getting their birth rates at replacement. It's starting in the first world in Asia. It is carrying over to Europe. And then finally, it is starting in Africa now in earnest. This will absolutely collapse our financial system. It will also completely collapse our culture. And not only that, I guess I'm of the, it used to be, almost everyone was of the moral persuasion that families were good in and of themselves. A civilization that does not produce families is a civilization that people are essentially saying is not worth carrying forward. And if you look at all of these problems, there's a lot of causes to this, but they all go down to essentially how we structured our culture around certain questions of like choice and values and individualism, and also the thornier issues of sexuality. And it's been very clear to me for a while that the views on these issues that have been put forward, not only have they been kind of like incredibly divisive, like there's no way that we're going to have a cohesive culture in this country if we can't decide like what like man and woman mean, which is essentially what the LGBTQ coalition is demanding be rendered unto them. There's no possibility for a common culture. It also is apparent that this new way of organizing ourselves around relationships and family formation just doesn't generate families. Like there's been a birth drop off in this country, but most of that drop off is that progressives just stopped having kids in the last 20 years. Like they just plain stopped. Conservatives are having the drop off is much less there, but the difference is just absolutely astronomical. So, I mean, to me, like this would be a major change. We have never had a permanent move back towards a social conservative direction in the last 150 years, to my knowledge. And so this would be an unprecedented change. And then that's on top of that, you'd also have to completely reform like the banking system, because all of our financial systems are about to go belly up in about 6 years when we finish rating the Social Security Trust Fund.
So, a lot of issues here. Do you see a path forward, River, where it could work out in a better way than your article was alluding to? Or do you see a much darker influence here that, regardless of these problems that Dave pointed out, is going to result in a much worse outcome than maybe Dave or the people within Dave's circle anticipate?
Well, I mean, it sort of depends on like I do think there's going to be a backlash, and it's like, well, what are the solutions to the falling birth rates thing? Are you going to do a nationwide ban on birth control or a nationwide ban on abortion? Like, I think if you do that, then you're like, if the plan is to still have a democracy, which I hope it is, then that's probably not going to work out very well.
I am very famously not a fan of democracy, so
yeah. There's that devious smile from Dave.
Here's the thing: like this is a great example. Like our values are no longer aligned, right? Like you can make an appeal to democracy. I mean, I'm not like we have to get rid of quote unquote democracy, but because the system is democratic does not make it better in my book. It is. Well, you could say, yeah, like it's about as practical as like the color of the flag or whatever.
Well, let's break it down, River. Why do you see democracy as being something that is important to you, and what do you anticipate would happen if we were to go in Dave's direction?
I mean, it probably wouldn't be great for me under some sort of like sort of religious, like social conservative autocracy, because I'm a gay guy, so I would probably have to get the fuck out. It's not like, obviously it just would not work with my lifestyle. And I mean, my family's been in this country since like the colonial era. And they are pretty like socially conservative. My parents are Baptist youth pastors, and I mean, they are socially conservative. They're against abortion. They're even against gay marriage, but I don't think they want to live. They're not against like birth control. Even a lot of the things that people are advocating for are like very specifically Catholic, and this is not a Catholic country. I don't know. Like I grew up in the South. Like you ask people down here, like they'll be like, "Are you Catholic?" They're like, "No, I'm a Christian." Like they don't. It's not the same thing to them.
Most
So I think there's going to be a
Protestant
lot of,
denominations were against birth control before, like the 60s or 70s.
but they're not
This is
anymore.
yeah. Well, sure, but if we're talking about like the the ideas of how sexuality was supposed to work before 1900, I know there was like a difference where mainline Protestants got a lot more liberal in the 70s and the Catholics kind of stood their ground, but there was not a large difference on these issues like in the time of the founding fathers or the time of Abraham Lincoln or even the time of Woodrow Wilson. These are all late developments of the 20th century. Look, I mean, like we can talk about various ways to reform. Obviously, the things that are practically on the table right now, things that are immediately causing problems with relationships are things like, pornography, OnlyFans, high-speed dating. These are the immediate technologies that have caused the immediate drop-off. But I mean, it's less a matter of one policy or another working, and more a matter of what the priorities of the country actually are. Are the priorities of the country to, make the GDP line go up, or are the priorities of the country to preserve the people and the health of the people collectively over the long term? And if it's the former, I don't know how loyal I am to a government that just wants to keep, consumption constantly rising. That seems like an incredibly, I don't understand what to do with that moral center of the government. The center of the government has to be, if not on a central religious principle, then on the health of the people collectively over the long term. And, if you look at the collective health of the people, the first thing you'll notice worldwide is that family formation number just dropping like a brick. And, it's intimately connected to the fact that a Social Security is going to implode too. Social Security is designed for a birth rate that is leveling out or going up. It can't work without that feature in place. So, this is only a symptom. The bigger problem is, what is the moral direction of the country? And it used to be that most Americans had a moral system that was more or less aligned. If you go to the 60s, almost everyone was Christian. A few people were Jewish. Even atheists had more or less aligned moral systems to the general Christian way of thinking and believing things. Now our society is completely morally divided. It's very easy to see on this whole trans issue. What they say is good, like they consider pornography like a positive good. Like pornography is like a beautiful thing that is part of the vocation of liberty. And I say it as this horrible, horrific drug that just absolutely has wreaked havoc in men and women's relationships. A good example also is like the trans thing. Like I come from a progressive community. Trans kids is a great example of this. So progressives think that not allowing kids to at least socially transition, most of them believe in like these, reversible hormone blockers, but not essentially transing kids in one of those two senses. They consider that child abuse, whereas I consider doing that to be child abuse. So you have like the moral systems are completely opposed on critical issues. And so how can you even run a democracy in that situation?
Well, I think
Yeah.
Can I go ahead?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think like the trans kids issue is probably that's one of the issues where I think the right is correct about, and like they were correct to say it. I think the average person doesn't think that kids should be transitioned. I don't think that. I mean, the best like critics I know of, of like the trans kid issue are gay people. Yeah. Because a lot of gay people grow up, quote unquote, gender nonconforming. You're like an effeminate boy or like a tomboy girl.
Or like Barry Weiss, for instance, she's been talking about this for a long time.
Yeah, she's a lesbian. And,
so there are people within more of the quote-unquote liberal side who are completely aware of what you're talking about, Dave. The bigger issue for me is not that. It's, if I could sum up, Dave, what you're saying, it's similar to imagining the worst possible outcome, like a meteor is going to strike the Earth unless we do A, B, and C. And if we take a step back, and River, if you were to, what is it called, Silverman, what Dave is talking about right now, it would be this do or die scenario where, yes, there may be people who are going to end up not having as great of a life, but if we don't do this, it means complete destruction of our entire civilization. If those were the stakes, what exactly is there to do? And I'm not saying they are, but if we were to like get into that mindset, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I think that I think Dave and I probably agree a lot actually on economics. Like, Lev, you probably remember. I mean, I used to write a lot about like the PMC and like about like I am like economically like very much like on, I guess, which you get to like the old left maybe or something. I think that like mass immigration is class warfare. I think that our trade policies have been disastrous. I actually think that the Trump administration's efforts to reindustrialize the country, like I think that's noble. I think they're going about it in a haphazard kind of way that isn't optimum. Like just like doing blanket tariffs on like everything. Like there's just some things like just berries or avocados or whatever we just don't like grow here. So it's kind of pointless. And I think it's the sort of thing that's going to turn people off to the tariffs and it's actually going to hurt the project long term. But I think that a lot of, I mean, there's a certain degree to which things like falling birth rates, it's the pill. Some of it, a lot of it is like social conditioning. People have a hard time settling down, whatever. Some of it is economic, like I do have like, a lot of like straight friends who are like, they do want to have kids, they do want to settle down, but like they can't buy a house. They don't want to like bring a kid. They don't want to have a kid when they're like jumping from apartment to apartment every year because the rent keeps going up. And so I think in a lot of ways, like we have lost, I don't see it so much as a moral thing. I think we've like lost like the baseline for like what a normal life should be. And like some of that is cultural, but I think a lot of it is economic. Everybody, there's just this huge like precarity that just pervades like all of our lives now economically in a way that's like really harmful. So like if you have like the ability to control when you have kids, of course you're going to like try to be strategic about that to give your kids like the best life that they can have. And I think more often that doesn't result in people having no kids, it results in people having less kids, sometimes later on in life. And, stopping short of like, outright like banning birth control, throwing women in jail for having like abortions, I don't think that's really going to change. And if you do that, then I think like, I don't know. I don't want to like be in like a civil war like that's like that would be more harmful, I think, than whatever the alternative is, which is some replacement birth rate, and we have to like allow immigration to catch up with that or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think allowing the birth rate to fall through the floor and then replacing the native population with immigrants is an absolute disaster idea. I think this is essentially replacing.
But I mean, it's not the end of the
understatement,
world, I don't
right?
think. I mean, like, I don't know. We've had mass waves of immigration before. I mean, you're a Catholic.
You've had mass waves of immigration when the country was empty and you were colonizing it. And even then,
not in the 1900s.
In the 1900s, the majority of the country was empty. Like the immigration wave that colonized the West went from about 1850 to 1919 when we essentially had our big immigration timeout. And if you look at where the population of the United States lives right up until 1920, it's like it's like 90% to the east of the Mississippi River. Like almost nobody who lives in the West.
Falling, wouldn't that wouldn't the numbers balance out?
Yeah, but it's also a question of what's going on in the inner life of the migrants, which I think is tremendously important, and not something that is considered as much.
Well, I think people okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go on. Well,
I think people overreact a little bit too. Like, I mean, I'm critical of like mass migration, especially illegal migration, because I think it's economically harmful to the working class. But that said, I grew up in Texas. and like second generation Mexicans where I grew up are just like rednecks. Like they drive around in F-150s. They listen to country music. Like they do, especially the Latinos assimilate like pretty quickly. You know, I know there's like some other groups maybe that don't assimilate as quickly, and you know,
Well,
They assimilate
into
into consumer culture. And that's been the natural
yeah, they also
pattern.
like,
It's like they
convert to evangelical Christianity.
Some of them, yeah, but
Yeah,
I mean, when you see the mass migration waves, especially into Europe, what you see, I mean, this is a great example too. Like, it's not just Texas. People like using Texas because it is the best example of immigrants.
Well, I use it
"Quote unquote" assimilate. Sure, but I mean, I've had this debate millions of times. People always love Texas because it's the best example we have, because the immigrants are coming from Mexico. Texas is very like the religions aren't that different, Catholicism to Protestantism. You know, Mexico used to own Texas. There's common history there, you know, with the whole Alamo stuff.
Remember the Alamo?
My ancestors were
McCarthy more
immigrants to
recently,
Mexico,
you know,
almost.
whatever. Like, but
Oh,
you know,
wait. I want to make sure we got that. You said, River, your ancestors were immigrants to Mexico.
Yeah, like they came before the Texas Revolution.
Oh, wow.
From like Alabama, because they gave away Mexico gave away all this land to like the poor whites or whatever in the South, and so they came and then they just like took the country over.
they were trying to manage the Native American population.
The Comanches, yeah.
I mean, what we're talking about right now with the Founding Fathers, for instance, as a counterexample to what Dave potentially fears will happen here, there is this thing that I don't really like. One of the reasons why I'm siding a lot with River here when it comes to these concerns about the reaction of the right is because I don't think a lot of people on the right, as far as like a lot of these political pundits that you would watch, I don't think that they measure up to any great extent to the ginormity of the Founding Fathers, the level that those people were thinking. I'm talking about like the slop peddlers, the people who are just saying whatever it is that their audience wants to hear and make money and generate clicks. I'm not seeing a lot of great potential from those people. And my concern here is that if we're talking about migration, to kind of like be on Dave's side here for a little bit, I'm not sure how easy it is to achieve the level of the Founding Fathers of that generation when it comes to people who come from completely different cultures, and we don't have any mechanisms that are set up that are even thinking about getting people, you know, let alone migrants who are coming here to that level. Like, that's a whole other can of worms, which I think needs to be addressed here. Like, how do we get people to the kind of level where they're going to, or at least enough people, I'm not saying like, you know, everybody, but at least enough people who are responsible elites, pillars of the community, so that they are very philosophically minded, so they see the bigger picture as opposed to just being a bunch of political prostitutes that are just trying to get clicks from people, you know? Like, that's the key here. I don't know, River, what say you?
What is the question? Should the right?
How do we go about?
We need less slop peddlers, or what?
Less slop peddlers, but also how do we go about getting to the level of, you know, the revolutionary Founding Fathers generation of intellect when it comes to the people who are going to be our future leaders? Because if we're talking about preserving the republic here, right, like the focus should be on how do we get people who are going to be that competent, as opposed to just gambling on bringing people in who are from completely different cultures. And even if they do get to a level of being a consumer, that is still very, very far from the ideal, especially when we're talking about people who are supposed to lead government. Like, those are the main people I'm talking about here, people who are supposed to be the new elites. How do we make sure they're not slop peddlers, and how do we make sure that they're going to be actually competent as close as possible to that a level of 1776?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I guess like people could stop like giving the slop attention. People could stop engaging with the slop. I don't know if they will.
Well, that's democracy, isn't it? You know, it's
well,
the people
yeah,
who
they
decide
are.
to.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would love like better like classics education in schools. I mean, you know, even as somebody who's like kind of nominally on the left, I wrote like an article a couple of years ago, like saying that they should like teach the Bible in school because it's like a foundation for like all like Western thought for the past like 2,000 years, and that like you just can't really appreciate art or culture or like, anything really in the West without understanding it. Yeah, it's tough.
But you see what I'm
When
getting
you
to
say,
here, right?
hey,
Yeah.
who do you mean? Like, because this is another thing that, it's impossible to not mention this as part of our conversation, but the left entirely owns education in this country. The only way that right-wingers can get education is by paying for it out of pocket, on top of what we're already paying the government-owned leftist education from the mainstream, and also the government education called higher education, the university system, which is subsidized at all levels by the government, and which is entirely controlled by the left. These ideas like we should teach classics. This is like the classic like Republican talking point, but like we're gonna do like tell Judith Butler to teach Aristotle.
Yeah, we got to tie her up, and we just have to force her to do it.
You'd have to completely replace the entire apparatus of leftist education and replace it with a conservative system. That's music to my ears. That's the kind of radical change that I would think would be awesome.
Or at least University of Austin classical liberal system. Like it's not the worst, right? Like what Barry, again, back to her, what Barry Weiss is doing right now, River. Like I'm curious, you're in the whole free press world. What do you make of what's going on with that? Because that does seem to be an honest attempt at bringing back the kind of things you're talking about.
Yeah. I think it's an awesome development. I work for Barry. She's very good about like hearing out both sides. She lets people talk. She lets people work through things. Like, that's the sort of like attitude I think you need. The problem, I think, for me, like the big problem with like the universities isn't necessarily like the Judith Butlers of the world. It's like all these like this bureaucracy that's been built up around this entire administrative state that exists around education that like both makes it more expensive and also these are what is like fueled the campus culture wars, man. And anything like all this like
you don't think the
lawsuits and like things that come up. I kind of like I don't like Judith Butler, but like I like sort of like eccentric academics. I think they add something to the world, even if they're like Judith Butler is probably like a bad example. But
eccentric academics is one thing at a high level, but then we decided to teach every single person. We decided to send average IQ people to college, and then college became a giant indoctrination center for progressivism. Like that was the most predictable. I can't believe no one predicted this sooner. Like you could see the Great Awakening from decades away. Decades. Like we were just graduating rank after rank after rank of students, and they were all being educated by, like, I discovered Judith Butler because as a freshman, we were required to take diversity courses, and she was part of the curriculum, along with a variety of different other people like Noel Ignatieff and stuff like that. Like this is not like an elective. This is not like, oh, they work at the university. This is what we're putting in front of freshmen for the first 2 years of this call.
If you don't mind me asking.
University of California.
But okay, well, that's the problem. I went to University of West Florida.
You'll find the exact same thing in Harvard. You'll find the exact same thing in Stanford. You'll find the exact same thing in the University of Washington.
Wait, River, who did you read?
Same thing in Brown.
Who did I read?
I want to know who River read.
I was in international relations, so I read like Mearsheimer. We read like Jared Diamond, of course. All that sucks. But I don't know. I took like even like the most libtard class I took probably was like I needed an elective. I took like a Hispanic literature course or something because it was like the only thing that fit my schedule.
Chicano
and even that
studies.
wasn't even like that lib. It was like we read like Uno Diaz or whatever. It was just like all these different novels. I don't know. Like the state university systems in at least like in the South aren't that crazy. I'm sure if I had enrolled in some kind of like gender studies program, I would have had to read Judith Butler. But no,
are we really entertaining the idea
Sartre?
that the university systems are not aren't both incredibly leftist and driving the phenomenon that we call wokeness?
Some of them are, but I think that the way that
We're really trying to
the way
downplay
that
this
Judith
hard.
Butler's sort of like postmodern ideas, like particularly about gender and stuff, I think the way that those really spread was not necessarily through academia. I think it was through the internet. And this kind of like goes back to my
Yeah, well,
point.
like after they were mainstreamed in academia and after all college students were taught these things, yes, they in 2012, like they took off. But
Tumblr
by
and all that.
2012, you got 20 years. Well, I'll give you this example, River. I have a PhD, and before I decided to become a wage cuck and work in industry, I applied to a college professor. And since my research record wasn't stellar, you know, it was okay. I applied to all these bottom tier universities in the middle of places like Montana and Texas. How many diversity, equity, inclusion statements did I fill out? Pledging from the bottom of my heart that I believe diversity, equity, inclusion were my number one values. Almost all of them. Almost all of them. This is everywhere. And you need these statements as a condition to even get in the door as a potential academic in engineering.
Yeah,
like that is what we're talking about 7 years ago, and that system was put in place 10 years ago, and even before then it was implicit. To do my grant applications for my PhD research, I had to write 2 essays about how a purely theoretical mathematics subject was going to have a positive impact on the African American community. This is not the purview of a few crazy departments in the University of California. This is everywhere inside the system, and it's still there. The personnel is policy because the people in the colleges believe this, and they teach this ideology as a religion. Even LGBTQ thing. This is if you look at the number of like LGBTQ people, like kids who identify as LGBTQ, right? I remember it was used to be a progressive, and I advocated for gay marriage, and then conservative, oh my God, more kids are going to convert to LGBTQ, and I'm like, oh, you crazy kook, you know, you're watching too much Bill O'Reilly. If you rotted your brains, it's obviously genetic. This can't increase. But then you look at the statistics about identification with LGBTQ. It doubles every 10 years.
But interestingly, if you look at it, the number of
LGBT identification.
I've seen those numbers, and if you look at them, the number of like gay men, especially men who identify as gay, and I think lesbians usually too, like stays pretty constant.
Lesbians and bisexual women are the ones that skyrocket.
Yeah. And the trans stuff, but like
the trans stuff, yeah, well, that's gone up by orders of magnitude. It hasn't even doubled. It's
and I mean, we always like used to make fun of these people. Like, I mean, I think a lot of it is like just trendy. Like some of it is like, you know, if you want to advance in the PMC, like the easiest identity that you can adopt is
exactly
like, to say you're non-binary or bisexual or whatever.
But what this resembles, River, is a religious doctrine. Like these people
disagree with you.
For a large amount. Like you are correct that it's mainly like women who are driving this, and it's not even there isn't like a correlative explosion of gay sex. It's an explosion of gay identification, and the reason is that they're trying to signal their adherence to an ideology that they learned in universities. It's being put through HR and the internet too, and that's driving it as well, right? But like these ideas, you know, the idea in the 90s, we all thought that these kooky ideas would remain contained. Then we learned in the 2010 that these ideas, even if it wasn't the literal sex, they would explode outwards exponentially as they became part of the educational system. And that, you know, people might walk away like trans is now unfashionable. In the last year, trans has become unfashionable since Dylan Mulvaney has happened. But you know, these people, like you can't really unlearn a religion once you've changed your lifestyle like that. Like it takes an enormous conversion. There was the Jesuits used to say, "Give me the man," for the first 10 years, and I'll give him to you for life. You know, once you view the progressive worldview as a religion that's essentially being taught in state schools, you realize that there's a reason why all of the social changes that go in a progressive direction are permanent, and all of the changes that go in a conservative Christian direction are transient.
I don't think they're permanent though, because I think that the wave is like on trans issues, like the wave has really turned back, where even you have like Gavin Newsom now saying that, you know, he doesn't think that biological men should be able to participate in women's sports.
Are we going to repeal gay marriage? Like, is that going to happen?
No, because that's politically unpopular.
Why not? Like, no, if I taught in the schools, like if I taught in the schools, like if I required all professors to write a statement about how they denounced gay marriage as a condition for them serving at the university, and I required all professors to denounce gay marriage as a condition to get grant funding, like give me 20 years and I'll have petition against gay marriage that will win a popular vote in this country. If you teach it at the university level.
I don't think you will, actually, because I think like what turned the tide for gay rights was like people coming out. And so it's like when you're talking about like when somebody says like we're going to overturn gay marriage now, people are like, oh, you're going to overturn my nephew's marriage? I like him. I like his husband. That's fucked up. Like the for all of its faults, like the gay liberation movement, quote unquote, is like its enduring success is that now everybody knows a gay person that they kind of like. And so it makes it harder to like demonize gay people or to like take away their rights, because you're not dealing with like a theoretical boogeyman or whatever you're dealing with.
But you're telling me that we are going to take away trans people's rights.
Well, I mean, to play sports, I don't know. I feel like if you transition,
we're going to take away their right.
We're
We're going to take away their right to play sports. We're going to take away their right to get. We're going to take away their right to get drugs, at least before they're 18. We're going to take away their right to essentially have their preferred sex or preferred gender or whatever the word they're using for this week. We're going to take away their right to have that recognized publicly and as a matter of course in the government institutions. These are all things that they claim are rights, and it's all things that we're taking away. I know tons of trans people. So
most
it's
Americans
now.
Don't though. Really, I don't think my parents have ever met a trans person.
It's easy. Well, no, that's not. But then you see the explosion of trans identification among young people, and you're like, okay, it's just going to be a matter of time before they do know a trans person, and then all of these changes are going to be irreversible.
Well, I think the trans thing has sort of suffered from like the whole identity is like. It's sort of exploded. There are a lot of people who are backing away from it now. There's the weirdest thing that they did was like the non-binary thing, where like nobody even really knows what trans means anymore. Like at the very least, it used to be like a pretty specific thing. I think that you will actually see, like, I think we've seen like peak trans, because the thing is like to transition is like quite a different thing than like coming out as gay. Like it actually involves like medical intervention.
I don't see why that should matter.
And all sorts of things where you actually have to like make a commitment to do a thing, and you're changing everything about your like it's just never going to be like as common as like being gay, which like
is being gay Lindy. That's the question.
Being gay, Lindy. Having gay sex is Lindy. I mean, there's like.
I actually agree with that.
No, I mean nobody
having buggery is way more Lindy than identifying as gay. Like it's your identity. Like
no, I mean every
that is like if
every
you went back
queer
100
rights
years,
historian agrees with you. It's something that the gay identity as a distinct personal identity developed in like urban post-war America. Like
okay, I mean, and you could find like a number of Greeks and like Japanese samurai that enjoyed what they used to call buggery, right? But they would laugh the idea of gay marriage right out the door. For the same reason that they would laugh trans sports right out the door. The admission of trans people into women's sports makes the idea of women's sports ridiculous, just as the admission of gay people into marriage makes the idea of marriage ridiculous. It defeats the whole purpose of the thing, which is, again, to create the generative basis for the collective reproduction of this.
Well, whether people like it or not, marriage in the United States is not a religious institution, it's a civil institution. And we have a secular state. And so, like, I mean, my thing is like, gay people did not like destroy the institution of marriage. Like straight people did that all by themselves. The fucking boomers, all of them got divorced.
I agree with that.
They made the institution a contract, and So I get the right to do the same because I pay taxes in this country. So I get to have
Well, I mean,
a meaningless but like sort of like economically advantageous governmentally contracted
I
relationship
am
with
going
my
to
husband,
100% agree
just
with
like
you
everybody
there.
else.
Like, I mean, this is the thing. You are 100% correct that once we accepted no-fault divorce, and to a lesser extent birth control, like the idea of gay marriage was kind of on the table. But by redefining marriage, the redefinition of man and woman was also on the table. Once we could essentially say that, like, because of a constructed identity, which by your admission did not exist before 100 years ago, that nobody who performed these acts would ever use as like an operative political identity for themselves that would confirm meaning. That now we're going to redefine like 1,000-year-old institutions and 1,000-year-old words, and undermine the sacramental connection of the state to the predominant religion of the country. You might as well redefine what man and women mean, because that's the same. That's the same.
What do you guys think of the super chat? Or, well, not a super chat, but it should be, from Rox Okara, that the worst thing that happened to marriage was the idea that it was about love.
Well, I would modify that. The original idea of marriage was that marriage came first, love came second. And that if you love the person before you got married, that was like a bonus, right? But the idea of love inside marriage was something that was very distinct from like the kind of like enthusiasm of early relationships. It was much more like, I have learned this person's a part of my life. I have sacrificed for this person. I've been through things with this person. And that was the idea of love in marriage. But again, romantic love had been kind of growing across the 18th and 19th centuries, but it was always considered secondary to that longer idea of love, which is, I don't want to call it agape, but it's much more like agape than it is. I don't exactly know what to call it, storgy.
And there was also love between men and men who were not gay. It was just more of like this brotherly love, which today
They call that philia.
Yeah, well, today people say like, oh, they're like secretly, homosexual, whatever. But no, sometimes, dudes just would love other dudes, and that was considered to be, no problem. But this goes to an even more important point, I think, which relates to a story that I recently got from the architect right now who is working on the reconstruction. That's why you're seeing all these wires here. He came from being an alcoholic. He became a born-again Christian, and he's now a pastor who brings in other people who are in this bad state. And what he says is that a lot of them, they may go off of heroin for a bit, but then they're right back on it. And what he thinks is going on here, I'm curious what you guys think, is that because they know that the government at the end of the day is going to provide one way or another for their basic survival, they don't do anything that they would have done in a situation where if they wouldn't do it, they'd just die because there wouldn't be any support whatsoever. So how much is all of these things that we're talking about, whether it's marriage, whether it's about like the nobility of the founding fathers or whatever, how much does all of this come down to the fact that we have enough stuff for us to be able to survive as people, so we kind of extend this perpetual adolescence in terms of our civilization, while back then they didn't have a lot of these cushy, comfy things to fall back on. It was literally do or die, and that's what ended up cementing a lot of these things that created civilization in the first place.
I mean, I think it's a lot of that. That's absolutely what causes it. I mean, technology and comfort drive cultural degeneration. Now, I believe it's the government's job to kind of push back on that and give space for people who want to push back from that. And because if the government pushes in the direction of hedonism, it's going to destroy the collective health of these people, and our cultural and genetic line will be completely destroyed. And I think that's so much more valuable than just like GDP numbers going up and like more dopamine and like pornography and all this stuff. I mean, I say that even if I didn't believe that there was like a higher morality that we needed to pursue. I don't think that the government's job is just to increase the levels of hedonism, and I guess that's why I'm kind of so critical of democracy.
But wasn't it
Is that
Mother Nature that ended up creating these horrible situations for humanity to overcome? What you're kind of saying is that you would like the government to artificially impose the kind of things that just nature and having to contend with, competing tribes and, the Indians, whatever, in America back during the Manifest Destiny days. Like,
I mean, isn't that what all law does, right? Ultimately, if you went around killing people in a state of nature, eventually those people would get together and kill you. And the state intervenes and either carries out the execution itself or tries to punish you in another way to correct the antisocial behavior. All law is an attempt to take the consequences of actions and make them more imminent for the individual. Now, technology has gotten to a point where, it's created so many problems with these feedback loops that it's very difficult for law to teach people the proper behavior. And maybe, like my friend Oren McIntyre thinks the ultimate destiny of us at this stage is going to be to fall back to a lower level of civilization. But I'd like to use every tool at my disposal to make sure that transition is as seamless as possible and occurs without, like I said, the destruction of the collectives, culturally or genetically, that built this country. And, with the minimal amount of suffering as well, I guess,
Well, yeah, River, what do you think of this artificialization adding into the government's daily repertoire of not just, collecting taxes, but now imposing morality for the sake of, something that back then I would differ from Dave. I would say that the reason why a lot of these things were done in this very heavy-handed way was because they were part and parcel of the harsh environment that a lot of people were already living in, where you may not have had that much of a choice. There were all kinds of marauders and, wild animals and wild people and all kinds of crazy things that were at the gates. So it wasn't as artificial, in my opinion. But anyway, River, curious what you think.
Well, I mean, I think when you're talking about people being addicted to like fentanyl or meth or whatever, like on the streets, I mean, the types of drugs we have now are not the types of drugs that people had back in the day. I mean, you always had like alcoholism and like things like that, and there was usually like a social cost to that. I do think like there, in my opinion, like if we just want to like stay on addiction, like the approach to that has like been too libertarian, I think. And people have called me like a fascist because I've said that, the solution to the homeless problem is one, like court mandated, like inpatient rehab, and with the alternative being jail. And also, like, we need to reopen the asylums, and we don't have to make them evil. Like, we can make them better, but there are just some people who are too mentally ill, either because of drugs or just because they are genetically, they have schizophrenia, they have, something wrong with them, that they just can't function in society, and that, like, a good society would not just let these people sort of just, like, suffer on the streets in the name of, like, autonomy. Because if you literally, like, can't distinguish reality from the sort of delusions inside of your head, like, you don't have autonomy anyway. It's like letting a child like live on the streets because they say they want to or something, like a 5-year-old. And so, like, I think like the actual compassionate thing to do is to, like, for the state to take an active and even like paternalistic role, and help people. I don't think when it comes to like people who are addicted to drugs or mentally ill people, I think like you don't have to make life harder for them. I think you have to like push them forcefully on the right path, or like provide a place for them that isn't on the streets. I don't think I think their lives are hard enough. Like, no normal rational person would just like, who is thinking normally and rationally, would like choose to like live in a tent on Skid Row with a needle in their arm. Like, there's something wrong with you if you're willing to go that far to the bottom and still not get help. So, I don't think you have to make
I
it
totally
quite hard.
agree. I totally agree with you. I guess, I 100% agree with you on that eviction question. That's been one of my hobby horses for years, is to get a more active way to confront the homeless problem and getting them rehoused and reinstitutionalized if necessary. I guess I just see all of this as sort of an extension of the same thing. I see this. I see a lot of the things online we have right now, like the Tinder culture and the porn stuff, the OnlyFans in particular. I'm not even so sure how that should be legal. Uh, this this stuff all needs. How can you see these systems and think like, well, okay, this is people expressing their liberty. It's obviously people destroying their ability and degrading themselves, I guess.
I don't know where River is right now, but if I could comment on what you just said right now, the concern here is that the people who are going to be the enforcers of this are very far away from what you would probably consider to be the ideal. That they themselves are also degraded people who are dependent on the algorithm of whichever social media apps they use in order to gain followers and to gain likes and all that. And I don't want to discount how influential something like that is in terms of the decisions that people make. Because if we're talking about democracy, how horrible democracy is, well, over here on X, if the decisions that people make are based on the amount of people that are going to share, the decision to other people, then that's a little bit fucked up too, isn't it? And how people are going to conduct themselves as far as implementing wise law. I'm very curious what you think about this as far as whether the algorithms that people are under right now is going to be a big obstacle to this kind of,
Well,
proper law enacting.
I want to compliment River here because like I did agree with this article that Twitter is a complete mess. It also kind of like is the end point of an unregulated idea space. Now, obviously, I like the unregulated idea space because I have a bunch of ideas that were regulated out of the idea space that I feel are critical to be inside the idea space. But I don't like this doom scrolling through constant dopamine traps and shit posting. This is an incredible waste of human potential and human time. I don't exactly know how to fix the problem while still allowing people to express themselves and get necessary ideas to the fore.
I mean, even your avatar, and I know this is kind of a side thing, but I always like that image of Teddy Roosevelt, with his bushy mustache.
No, it's
and
not
the
Teddy
gun.
Roosevelt.
No,
it's G.K. Chesterton.
I keep getting it wrong. Sorry. Yeah, J.K. Rowling. G.K. Chesterton, yes. So, I mean, apples and oranges. But anyway, when it comes to the energy of you guys, whether we're talking about you, Landshark, even Logo Daedalus, as much as we disagree, there is something about that, and I don't know, River, if you're familiar with a lot of the people whose names I'm mentioning right now, Orrin McIntyre, like a lot of these people, I would consider them to be, like in a high area relative to, the average guy with this, Bored Apes avatar or whatever, like all of these crypto grind set people who came onto the scene afterwards. And I just see so many of these new people as just regurgitating this same thing that we're so tired of. Like, we've seen it time and time again, and now the normies are catching on. But these are not intellectual people. These are not people who you can go deeply into these issues with, and that's a really, really big concern here. Because if they're the ones, because they seem to be the ones that Elon Musk is sharing the most from, like from the worst of the worst, that's not a good strategy when it comes to having a wise government. That even if we were to say the meteor's coming, we have to make, certain things to democracy that's going to, be inconvenient at best for some people, but we have to do it, otherwise civilization falls. How do we make sure that the reins of this are not going to be taken by these fools, by these absolute political prostitutes? To me, that's the biggest thing. So I don't know, River, any thought on that?
I don't know. I kind of agree. I think like it's like cringe millennial like humor like tweets from like these degenerate gamblers, which is what the creepo people are, by the way. Like, is that going to be the downfall of the country or the right? I don't know. I seems like it might be. I don't know. I mean, like, the thing is like, we still do live in a democracy, and like I think when the average like person encounters this, they're just going to be so weirded out by it that it's just going to freak them out. And so it doesn't really like if I don't know, like if Elon was like reading whoever you guys think like he should be reading, would that really matter that much? Would it really change the way that the country's being run or the way that the public's perception? I don't know if it actually would.
Dave, what do you think?
Well, I have two things to say about that. I mean, first of all, River, as that people were weirded out by gay marriage, right? And that changed. Obviously, the goal of this discourse is that we think that certain ideas that are considered weird now need to be considered mainstream. So the actions you're taking here, it's designed to disrupt moralist thought terminating cliches that take these ideas out of the discourse. Now, there are a variety of ideas that are quite dangerous to the professional managerial class. The one that they're most worried about, or one of the ones they're most worried about, are ideas concerning group differences and ideas concerning group identity, specifically with various European peoples seeing themselves as distinct groups that need to be preserved and that have national ability to organize politically. Because once that happens, and the only reason why it doesn't happen is because essentially people are called names when they try to do it and are ostracized when they try to do that. But once that starts happening and it's allowed to get momentum, maybe not in America, but a lot of these governments in Europe are just going to start falling. And that will be a complete reset for how Europe governs itself. And, the repercussions of that are going to echo into America as well. And, I personally, I think that this is a necessary thing that has to happen. And it's better that it happens sooner rather than later. And, if that can be facilitated by freaking some people out, I think that it's just a necessary thing in order to address the larger problems that I brought up at the beginning of this talk.
Before River responds, before we respond real quick, I just want to lay it all out because Dave, we've been having this conversation for a long while. Let's just lay it all out there, what exactly it looks like. Fascist dictatorship comes in, knowing how disturbed brained a lot of these people are from the algorithms. We are going to have people who are probably going to get surrounded by a bunch of toadies that are going to create this, loop. And as a result, a lot of horrible decisions are going to be made down the line. If there's not going to be any checks and balances here, yes, it's going to fix some problems, but it's also going to have this top-down system where you're not really going to have a great time because you're going to have a bunch of idiots that are going to be in charge because the people around them are also idiots, and they're going to be telling those idiots how wonderfully smart they are. You see what I mean? Like, that's the thing that I just want to point out here, and maybe that is the only way for this to be done, but then how do we excise out of that? How do we exit out of that? So I don't know, River, I know that you want to respond to what Dave said as well, but if you also would be interested in responding to that, I would be very interested in what you have to say.
The toadies all around who? Like
the dictator,
the
the fascist dictator, the top-down system. We've seen it time and time again, Stalin and all these people. Like, that's not a good thing. We don't want these people to have this situation go on because they're going to cause a lot of problems. Even if they do solve the migrant crisis, even if they do if they do kick out all of the people from, the third world or from like the Muslim countries, if they do that in Europe, okay, but then you're going to have people with so much power and they're going to have so many people that are going to be fawning over them, telling them that they're the best. And that's going to degenerate in no time, in my opinion, unless Dave or River, you disagree. I don't know, but let me know what you think.
I'm not so sure I'm following. Who's going to degenerate?
The dictator and the people that are around the dictator. Yeah. power corrupts and all
Well,
that.
I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a dictator. If you're talking about the whole European revolution thing, that I think
Yeah.
is, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a dictator. I think it's going to be a more popular form of government, which might be in some ways worse or more dangerous.
I think the political economy in Europe is way different than what it is in the United States. And I mean, I don't want the fascist dictatorship either way, but like, I think, like Europe, it is a lot different. One, like they are just like uniquely incapable of assimilating anybody.
Can I ask you what is what is fascist dictatorship? You both use this. What do you mean?
I don't
by
know. I
that?
was using it because Lev used it.
Okay,
I
sure,
don't-
sure.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the traditional tin horn dictator, which I guess Putin would be the closest one that I could think of right now. You know my particular proclivities with the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, but somebody who is not really accountable to anybody and who has a lot of people around him who tell him how wonderful he is and smart he is, and it ends up degenerating the person who is in that position of power over time, I think. I mean, I think that's fair, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I was thinking something more like Viktor Orban. That would be my prediction, but sure, maybe Putin. I mean, you can't predict the future, I suppose. But oftentimes people say, like, is fascism everything and anything that it resembles what governments used to look like before 1900?
I mean, that is an interesting question. I would say technology plays a really big role here. The amount of things that governments are able to accomplish thanks to the radio, thanks to, train systems, all this kind of stuff. I think that also needs to be taken into account, especially now with the internet and AI and all that. I mean, look at China, how quickly they were able to bolt these poor people in their own houses during COVID. Like, that to me
Yeah,
is
I,
a
mean,
very
I was
disturbing
in
thing.
Canada during COVID. I don't think it's unique to China.
Well, at least the Canadian government didn't bolt you in your own house. And I understand they did a lot of bad things. Look, you're not going to hear any, disagreement from me when it comes to how they handled the poor families of the, who were supporting the trucker protests and all of that. Absolutely. That is right out of like a China Junior scenario, I would say. They're like looking up to Xi Jinping and the kind of things that he's doing. So you're right, Dave. I'm just saying that there is a gradient here. And
Yeah,
what
but
I'm
I think maybe this whole democracy versus dictatorship is the wrong dynamic. I mean, I think what people are what I'm talking about is a transformation of values. The current European elite, whether they are elected or kind of selected, like the current government of Romania, or there because they went into coalition to exclude the right-wing party that actually won, as happened many times. The European governments believe in this philosophy of GDP over alles, über alles. And I'm saying that's not how anyone would have seen the problems before like 1940. They would have seen this as, how do we ensure the survival and well-being of the collective? And with the framework that's kind of threatening to break out in Europe, it's that philosophical question that really scares the Eurocrats, because they have no good answers for it. And assimilation, have anyone really assimilated people? I mean, when we talk about assimilation in America, people get assimilated into consumerism. And so, that's not what people are looking for when they're looking for a meaning or a reason to continue, or a reason to motivate the state to exist. So it's no surprise that in these thicker European cultures where, assimilation isn't just buying Nikes and driving pickup trucks, but has like deeper cultural implications to past history. It's not surprising. It's not like a skill issue. It's the fact that when a Frenchman says my culture, he doesn't think of a list of consumer products. He thinks of a list of high investment cultural practices. Whereas in California or in Canada where I live currently, when we say assimilation, we mean like, do you eat Tim Hortons? Yeah, obviously the Indians who come here eat shitty fast food with high fructose corn syrup. But that's not what people really want when they say assimilation. And, and when people realize that, there's going to be this knock-on question about values.
Well, but it's also like, I mean, in America, like, to be an American at one point meant to be a Protestant,
Yeah.
And now
yeah.
it doesn't anymore.
A white Anglo-Saxon one at
And
that.
now it's just like a Christian. And I don't know. Like, I mean, I think like there is something to be said about like, you know, the differences, like the cultural differences between like black people and white Southerners are like really not that great. Like there is a lot of stuff but people like,
In terms of
I go up
cooking,
north,
they aren't, right? But in terms of history,
religion,
they radically are.
Religion is the same. The kind of like a lot of times like the family sort of dynamics, there's sort of always like a matriarchal kind of like grandmother, like mother figure. Like that's also very like prevalent in the South. Like there's a lot of similarities. And like I think like what I was going to get to earlier is like the difference between Europe and America is like there has like always been like a different mix of both European ethnicities and also like Indians and like
In
Native
Europe?
Americans and black people, and like there's always been like different types of people here, different religion, like to different portions of Christianity, and like even Jews were always a minority, but they've been here since the colonial era, so there was always like a level of like diversity that like never really existed in Europe, and like especially now, I mean like. When people like are getting into like the racial stuff, I mean, I think it's like morally wrong, but I also think it's like
Why is
there's
it
going to be a
morally
big backlash. Well, like saying that like black people and white people shouldn't be married, or that like black people are inherently inferior. Like I think it's like I don't think it's true, and I think it's kind of gross, and like it's like not how you live in.
I'm
a
not
country
talking
with-
about like trolls. I thought you meant like the actual serious.
No, I mean
conversation
like
about-
the anti-miscegenation stuff. I don't know how serious people are about that. I think some of them are very serious. And if you,
I think
just take
people are serious when they say that they want to preserve the collective understanding of their group, and people see. I guess the thing is that
So,
miscegenation
you're
doesn't really
against
disrupt that,
miscegenation.
but people perceive that as being disruptive.
I mean,
I
if you're
think I
against
don't have any
interracial
problem
marriage-
with African Americans wanting to preserve themselves as a people, and African Americans are a good example. I mean, like by the measure
but let me
of
just finish my
cooking,
thought.
yeah.
Like, if you're like I'm a white guy, working class family from the South. I have like maybe 50 years ago, everybody in my family would have been against interracial marriage, but now they have like mixed race grandchildren. Like every it's not like every but we have Hispanic people in my family. We have black people in my family. And so like when you start like talking about like biracial children as like quote unquote like failed Jewish science experiments or something, people are going to have a very visceral reaction to that, including like normie Trump voters who just have like mixed race grandchildren, because you are not going to get people to sell their own families for like some kind of like ideological project. It just isn't going to work.
I mean, mixed race grandchildren, like if we're trying to decide what is a troll and what is a like serious position of a right-wing person, mixed race Germans being a science experiment of the Jewish Jacobian guy with the big brain, that's a troll joke. I'm pretty sure that either that person is like disconnected from reality, or I mean,
it's not a Yakub thing.
It's a Yakub. That's a Yakub jokes. I mean, it's
not a Yakub. It's a specific thing I'm referencing that is in the Yakub
with the
thing.
science experiment thing. The idea that interracial children come from science experiments is obviously like that's not. I mean, there are people probably believe that, but these are crazy people, or they're really disconnected from reality.
I think what River is going into here, this is what I think
ahead.
is going on. From your article, River, what I take to be the case is that a lot of these trolly, you could say, jokes are things that are taken seriously by people who do have a modicum of influence, where you repeat a joke enough times and it ends up becoming more real, as it were. But one middle ground where I could try to see if we can get to is the idea of belonging to a certain club. So, for example, I know this goes into a bit of a metaphysical territory. Nevertheless, I think it's important. One guest that I had recently for the second time, Survive the Jive, Tom Rosel. I know, Dave, if you're familiar with Survive the Jive. Yeah. So he talks about how the people, if we're talking about like the white people all the way from the Yamna groups around the Ukrainian region and then expanding outwards into other parts of Europe from there. If we're talking about those people, what exactly is the differentiation between somebody who was purely from Yamnaya stock versus somebody who was more of like the Neolithic hunter-gatherer that ended up, having kids with the Yamnaya group. So eventually, you are going to have people who come from different roots, but what is the club that unites a lot of these people together? And I asked him, like, if there was somebody who was, of mixed race, who was thinking of themselves as belonging to a particular lineage, like a cultural, religious, pagan, for example, lineage here of worshiping their ancestors, would they belong? He said yes. Because if there is something that connects you to some higher ideas, then that does give you a reason to go on living for something more than just aggrandization. And I think that's the real key here. Like, if people are just consumers, then I think a lot of these things, these shadows from the past, are going to manifest themselves. But if people are living for something higher, regardless of who they end up having sex with and having kids with, then you do end up being part of this greater club that works for something greater than yourself. I don't know if that's a good middle ground or not here. I know, River, what do you think?
I don't know. I need to answer something, though. I think
Okay.
that this miscegenation thing is a red herring. Like, of the politicians that listen to the online right, like the most prominent one's JD Vance. Do you think he thinks his children are Jewish science experiments? I mean, this.
No,
this
but
is
Elon did
obvious,
just
like,
rehire somebody who said he wouldn't date outside of his race.
Okay, but who cares? Like, or do people's dating preferences matter? Like, that's one I don't believe is immortal. It is not immoral to only want to date your race. I know tons of people who only want to date their own race. When I was in high school,
Sure, but it was also a lot of
half
other
the
shit that
Jews
he said.
only wanted to marry other Jews. Like, this is a
Or
very,
Asians.
very common thing in society. So, there's a difference between saying, I want to marry someone of my own race, which is, I think, absolutely acceptable. And, biracial children are like the product of, the Yakub meme from from Malcolm X. Those are very different things, I think. And I think that, this is, if we don't differentiate them, then I think, I don't think we're going to get to the bottom of this, because, I think miscegenation, individual intermarriage, has always existed. The Othello effect, as I like calling it, this has always been part of growing up in the society. Now, miscegenation is kind of threatening if it goes on at too high of a percentage over time, but it doesn't really mean anything in individual cases, so and I think that the whole miscegenation thing is kind of a red herring for this whole question, even if you were someone who cared about race.
Okay, well, it's not the Yakub thing. It's like the conspiracy theory that Jews are like pushing interracial marriage on everybody but themselves to like degenerate the white race. Like, that's like what the tweet that I was referencing.
Okay, but
in the article was referring to. But
can I challenge this, though? There were a lot of Jews that I knew in high school who had parents who explicitly told them that they wanted them to marry other Jewish people, and said that they would want to eventually marry another Jewish person. If a white person had been like, oh, my parents want me to marry another white person, and that's my ambition, to marry another white person, that would have been totally unacceptable, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what my grandparents told my parents, but that's
okay. But I think
but yeah, I mean, no,
what
like,
you're seeing is like,
I'm not,
yeah,
but I'm not Jewish, so I don't know why I get the third degree.
No, but you're seeing, when I'm telling you, on the internet, you're seeing joke hyperbolic versions of a feeling of exclusion that has a steelman form, and that's what I'm trying to kind of parse out here, right?
How much of this is also this club effect, where if we're talking about Jews, I'm sure there's a lot of Jews out there who wouldn't mind their Ashkenazi son marrying a Sephardic girl. I don't know how common that is, but like the Sephardic Jewish people, they do have, if we're talking about like racial characteristics, they do have a lot more Middle Eastern characteristics than the Ashkenazi Jews, for example. So it's not necessarily like a race thing here. I really think that when it comes to that, it is more of like, are you a member of our club? Are you going to be like the nice, doting Jewish mother who's going to make sure that my grandkids are taken care of? Like, there's a certain expectation of the kind of life that you want to live in.
It's a religious thing, too. I mean, my great grandpa, he like married a Catholic, and it was like a big scandal in the family, even though she's the one who wound up converting, but like to Baptist. But Like, you know, like I think a lot of that is like not necessarily racial; it's more religious. But that's besides the point. I think I just brought up the anti-miscegenation thing because I think it's a very similar dynamic to the gay thing, like, or the thing with gay marriage, which is that, like, you know, there's going to be a backlash of that sort of thing because this is like this isn't like a theoretical thing or like something that you only see on TV. It's like biracial people or gay people in your life that you care about, and so like if you feel like they're being attacked like that, you're gonna react to that like pretty viscerally, and yeah, I think that when people feel like their friends and that their family are being unfairly and unduly singled out and bullied, that there's going to be a backlash to that, and that was just my whole reason for bringing it up.
Yeah, but I know I have tons of friends who are trans and trans-identified. It doesn't change my position on trans, does it?
But you're also an intellectual. If we're talking about people
Well, I
who
guess,
are
I mean, here's the
raised
thing,
on 4chan and just completely absent-minded, if those are our future politicians, like Rivers talking about this influence going into people who are not necessarily at your intellectual level, Dave, if those people were to then start imposing certain things on people that would harm, people who aren't causing anybody any harm, who are living their lives, but happen to go against whatever those particular people see as being wrong, like what then? Then we have a clusterfuck on our hands, don't we?
Well, look, this is why democracy sucks. You're always going to have troll versions of ideas that have a lot of basis to them. I think, like I said, interracial marriage, I hate that word interracial. It sounds pornographic, but marriages in between different peoples have always happened since the Middle Ages. At the same time, I think it's perfectly immoral to want to preserve your culture. I knew a lot of Jewish atheists who wanted to continue on their cultural practices and saw a marriage outside of the group as being difficult for that ambition. But it's not so clearly religious, and everything gets mixed up with each other. I think the thing is that there's just a certain number of when I bring across ideas like the need for family formation to be better grounded inside, the nation's understanding of itself, or to have a more healthy sexual culture, or to have a connection to a deep culture and a past, or to have an understanding of yourself and your people going through time, both culturally and genetically. These are all like serious issues that need to be grappled with, on the behalf of the nation state. And sure, you're going to find people online that are cringe and crazy and give you like the 4chan meme versions of these ideas. Sure, they're going to offend people. If I tell people that I don't want like pornography, then everyone who uses pornography is going to be like hurt by that, right? I'll be restricting their liberty. Yeah, sure, but I don't know what to say, right? If I try to crack down on OnlyFans, I will offend people who I know who work on OnlyFans. If I crack down on pornography, I will like restrict the liberty of people who use pornography. And if I stop this whole trans insanity, then I will. People who are trans, who I know, some of them family members, will be highly offended by that. But I don't see, other than just like saying that there can be absolutely no rules, and like we're going to organize our society around, making these sort of identities organized really around kind of like sexual practices be like the primary focus of our religious understanding of ourselves, then I don't know what the alternative is. We need a different way to conceptualize these relationships that is not based on these kind of choice and pleasure type decisions.
But let's break it down. So, River, could you break down what you anticipate would happen if, let's say, this politician raised on all of these low-quality 4chan memes that migrated their way into Twitter now ends up having a modicum of power over society? and wants to ban OnlyFans as a start. What do you see as being the slippery slope here? How do you see it working out? Because I really, really want to focus on like what are your biggest fears, and how do we make sure that the worst case scenario that you are imagining would be avoided while trying to do the kind of stuff that Dave wants to do as well.
Well, I mean, I'm not a right winger, so I think they would just lose the next election. And I don't really care if they would lose. I mean, like I'm kind of the Democratic Party doesn't really represent my views.
Well, let's break that down as well.
Like,
That's important too. So how would they lose? Let's just play it through, and then let's see if Dave agrees or not.
yeah, I mean, if you're like, we're gonna dissolve your gay nephew's marriage. You can't beat off. Your wife can't get birth control. Whatever, like just all of this stuff, like cascading on, and then maybe it gets worse, where it's like you start, having people going on TV and being like, hey, who knows, maybe we'll dissolve interracial marriages or whatever. Then like you're just going to alienate every person in the country who isn't a right-wing psycho, and like it's going to
imagine if River
if
is
you
a,
have the
yeah.
you're probably, and also like I don't know, like with this whole idea of like ending democracy, like it's not even going to work with like. You think the military is going to be on your side? I don't know. I live next to a Navy base. There's a lot of fucking gay guys there. Like, and it's not because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. They were there long before. There's a lot of retired, old Navy guys when I go to the gay bar that I see who were there a long time ago. They just had to be a little quiet about it. And there's a lot of black people and like a lot of like, it's this is not. Both the left, I think like everybody, like both the far left and the far right, like everybody thinks that this country is like Germany in like the 1930s or something, and it's fucking not. Like it's a multiracial democracy.
Dave,
but don't you think? I mean, when people used to say this about gay marriage in 2004, like, oh, if you support gay marriage, then you'll never win another election. People will never go for this. Blah 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 blah. But like, no one was like, oh wow, we should stop being for gay marriage because we'll lose the next election like that. And if they did do that, they would have been stupid.
I mean, people did. People did stop saying it. Like Obama didn't support it.
Wait, one at a time. Wait, River, repeat that. I want to make sure you guys don't speak over each other. So repeat what you just said. No problem.
I mean, they did. The Democrats did like avoid coming out all out for it. A lot of them, except for the ones that were trying to win national elections. Like Barack Obama, I don't think publicly supported gay marriage until like 2012, 2013.
Yeah, he was two-faced about it. He was saying
like,
one.
He lied. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
He lied.
Yeah, he lied about it, but
obviously.
he thought it was necessary to lie about it, which is kind of the point. Which is that you have
sure,
to like,
but the activists did. No
no
activist took this. No activist stopped advocating for gay marriage because it was unpopular. I think that needs to be said, right? Like, no activist was like, oh, guys, we can't push for gay marriage because it's not popular yet. The point of the activism was to make it popular.
Yeah, and you can try to make it popular, but the problem is like it would be like so there was like a big, the thing is with like gay marriage was the conservative, it coming out of the sort of radical, there was a very like radical strain within the gay movement in like the 70s and 80s, to where like gay marriage was seen as like the conservative thing, like the real radical queers or whatever, were like, no, we need to completely destroy the institution of marriage. It's patriarchal, it's evil, and we need to get rid of it. And like what the gay activists did, who were the conservatives really within the gay movement, were to say, we don't want to destroy anything. We just want to have like the same, we want to have marriages the way that straight people do. And there was even like debates about like, we'll take civil unions. Some people were okay with that. Some people
weren't. The Will and Grace
like,
era.
Yeah, there was a lot of like
this is
in
all,
between
this
here,
this...
like but they. The thing was that they were like, we're not taking away anything from anybody. The case that they made was like, we're not coming after straight people. We're not trying to like invalidate your marriages. We want to join the institution of marriage. It was like a very inclusive kind of like, why are you, at a certain point,
that's how it was sold. Certainly, I understand that it was sold as I read Andrew Sullivan, but my conclusion I used to be a huge Andrew Sullivan fan. I used to make this exact same argument for gay marriage, and I slowly began to realize that this is a complete lie. I mean, the action towards modifying the definition of marriage modified marriage and the way that straights approached marriage as well, to be more in line with this idea that sexuality was the point of marriage and not family formation. This is and once the change happened,
didn't the sexual revolution do that in the 60s?
Oh, the sexual revolution, it's a continuation of that same process. And so like if the Andrew Sullivan idea that you listed off there was like what these people really wanted, then there would be this huge movement inside the gay community to crack down on promiscuity, to crack down on divorce, to crack down on open marriages.
No more leather daddies in the parades.
That never happened. There was never like, oh wow, now we need to go out and like for the dignity of gay marriage, we need to make sure that these marriages aren't open, or that these people, or that lesbians don't divorce. Like they didn't care about that. It's the trial of Solomon, right? Like if they cared about marriage, if they cared about gay marriage, then they would have been worried about essentially open marriages, promiscuity before a marriage, and divorce. Like Christians are. We're very concerned about this stuff. You know, we fought wars over it, right? But like, that's not what, maybe there's like one or two guys. That's not what the majority of the LGBTQ did. They went right on to deconstruct the next thing in the cycle. You know, right from changing the definition of marriage to then changing the definition of man and woman. And, you know, so this idea,
are we
I
talking
understand
about
that's
like
propaganda,
a smoke-filled room full of, you know, like the cigar chomping, you know, big gay? In other words, are we talking about big gay here, the conspiracy? Or are we talking about when gay people who just wanted to settle down finally had that? Maybe there was like the bystander effect where they thought, well, you know, I don't really care if like these people over here are in their, you know, leather outfits outside, like it's not of my concern. There just wasn't any incentive to then stop the people who were going to up the ante. I know, River, what do you think?
The trans stuff, I mean, that happened for like a very material reason, which is that the HRC, all of these like other like big, there is like big gay, like that is the thing. And the big gay, like they got what they were fighting for, which was gay marriage. And then they were like, well, we still need to keep our jobs, so what are we going to do? And so they immediately pivoted to the trans stuff. And a lot of gay people do not like that and did not like it. I mean, you ask like the average lesbian what they think about the trans stuff, and you're going to hear some crazy answers. Like,
sure, but it's obviously not. Like, this was not, gay marriage was not an attempt was not an attempt by the LGBT community to become more sexually conservative inside their own communities. Like that's not what it was.
It was to get like the same sort of like benefits, civil benefits.
It's grab the bag and then deconstruct the institution.
The whole like moral institution of marriage that was already far gone before gay people got to it. You know, this is like
far. I mean, it's like saying that it's, but then the trans people could say the exact same thing. They could say like the definition of man and woman's far gone by the time trans people got to it. Yeah, okay, now you're going to take another step in this direction. Yeah. The question is whether you are invested in upholding these kind of necessary boundaries. That I'm sorry, like.
I don't know what happened to Dave over here. Oh, there we go. You're back now. You paused for a bit.
Am I back?
You are back.
There's some. The question is whether people are invested in maintaining these types of moral boundaries that are necessary to keep, you know, essentially biological families together. And by biological, I mean straight families. This is the purpose of marriage. And, you know, again, once you tell people that marriage is essentially just about, you know, a coupling of individuals that are defined by their own sexualities, then, you know, you've done the exact same thing to marriage that the presence of male individuals does to female sports. It destroys the whole purpose of the thing to begin with, which is to separate, in the case of female sports, to separate women from men. To put men back in means it's meaningless. The whole point of marriage is to separate the kinds of relationships that generate families from the kinds of relationships that do not. You know, and this is the necessary thing, and the fact that, you know, there were other steps along this path, which I fully acknowledge you're correct about. does not mean that this is not a step on the path that makes it impossible to reconceptualize this understanding of marriage.
Well,
And, one way or the other, it's going to go back.
Yeah, River.
If you have a religious conception of marriage, I mean, my parents, or my mom, my stepdad, really, teen mom, but long story. My mom, my stepdad, like, they have a very like Christian idea of marriage. Me being married to a man has not changed that at all. Like, if you can't keep your family together because I'm fucking a dude in the ass, like, that's kind of a skill issue.
No, it absolutely does affect. It affects me it affects me the same way as the definition of a man changing. Like, people changing the definition of what man and woman means, like, doesn't technically affect me. I mean, first of all, like, saying marriage is a religious institution, like, marriage predates the state. This marriage was the definition of marriage that Christians use was around thousands of years before the United States was a country. So the way I hear proponents of gay marriage talk about it is like, well, first the United States created this thing called marriage, and then these crazy religious people created their own version of it. And like, that's not what happened. What happened was that, but I mean, like, the marriage existed, then the state recognized it. Like, the definition of man, like, I'll point this around. If we change the definition of man to be whoever identifies as a man, would that affect you?
No.
But do you think we should? But do you oppose that change in definition?
Well, like, I mean, I like, what do you, like, in practice, like, the fact that trans,
the trans, I don't. At the heart of the trans issue, at the heart of the trans insanity, is a definition change, and that definition change is whoever says they are a woman is a woman. Whoever says they are a man is a man. That gender is completely vacuous quantity that can only be filled by a person's own self-identification. Truth be told, this definition change does not immediately impact us in the sense that you talked about gay marriage, or the marriage changing definition does not impact us. On a long enough societal time frame, it absolutely does. Because the way we use language and the way we conceptualize language molds how our government treats these institutions. And if the government treats the category of man as being completely vacuous, other than someone's self-identification, then the whole way they'll treat men and women will absolutely change. Just as if the government conceptualizes marriage as an extension of a sexual preference rather as the continuation of the family. A government that considers families, specifically families that are continuous through time, genetically and culturally, that's how the government used to conceptualize it. They conceptualized themselves as being the direct their direct clients to be essentially families. If family is changed, or if marriage is changed from the instantiation of a family to being the expression of an individual sexual choice, that absolutely changes the relationship between the state and the family, just as removing the definition of female as a biological category changes the relationship of the state to women. And, I'm sure lesbians will tell you the exact same thing on that front.
Well, I think that, like, this, I actually don't think that marriage has really much to do with the government recognizing a sexual relationship at all. Like, I think it's a contractual, union between two people that most of its benefits are sort of like economic. So if I die or something, my husband doesn't like have to fight with my brother or whatever to.
No, that's not true. That's not even that idea can't even sustain scrutiny on the gay marriage movement. I'm a Californian. I remember this. I mean, like, the primary benefit of marriage is status, like, is social status. That's why. I mean, this is what we tried to do in California.
I don't care about that. Like, I got married because my husband needed health insurance.
I had to finish this statement. Like, I remember this in California with Proposition 8. The olive branch that was given to the gay community when they legalized gay marriage was a version of civil unions that conferred all of the economic benefits except for the name. And the gay community overwhelmingly rejected that, because they realized what Christians realize and what is sometimes denied, but is obviously not true. The purpose of marriage is to confer social status. It's to say that marriage is so central in Western culture. This is not a detail. Well, it's really central in all civilized cultures, but it certainly is very central in Hindu and Jewish cultures and Islamic cultures too. But like, this is not like a detail. Like the fact that the state reconceptualizes marriage and expands it to a different type of group, the principal conferment is that of status, which was why no gay person in 2008 was happy when they lost marriage, but got all of the economic benefits. They were furious at that because it's not primarily economic.
Yeah, there may be some truth there. I mean, I know personally, like, I literally, like, me and my husband have been together for a long time. We lived together. It was, we got married because he needed health insurance. And the only way we could get that is if we got married. I wouldn't have cared if it were called a civil union or, like, whatever. But the point of the matter is, like, and I think it was kind of a lot of the gay people, it was just kind of a fuck you to social conservatives.
Oh yeah,
a lot of whom were
that's definitely what it was, for sure.
And there, I understand, like, kind of the ill will. Like, I mean, a lot of the rhetoric around gay people coming from social conservatives at the time was very fucking nasty, and so gay people being catty as we often are, we're like, well, fuck you, we're gonna do the most. And
now we got this whole back and forth thing going on, like you were alluding to in your article, right? Like, it's the process has been started of like the Capulets versus the Montagues over here as far as the cultural war, and you are contending that, like, if you were, for example, River, to secretly be like a super, like, you're not gay, you're a secret right-wing based chud, and you are trying to get the right-wing people to understand that, hey guys, if you actually want to have like your based ethnic state or whatever the hell, then like take it easy, don't push it as much as you've been pushing it with these idiots that are coming to the fore and talking about Jesus is against gay marriage and we have to repeal all this. No, do it quietly, do it subtly, try to emulate how the gay movement did it. Maybe, like, I don't know, Dave, if River was the secret agent of yours and this is what he was trying to do, would you at least agree with him? Would you at least agree with him? That
I do agree. I totally agree with you that this stuff on X is completely counterproductive, and it is gonna, like, you are absolutely right. A backlash was always gonna come, but the antics on X and the flexing and the stupid trolley shit with the Yakub memes and the joke Nazism stuff, this is absolutely going to accelerate the backlash, and it hurts me every time I see it. But at the same time, I feel that a necessary social change has to be made, and I'm not someone who tries to break into people's. I don't want to break into anyone's bedroom and police their activity or invade anyone's privacy. But a certain way that we publicly conceptualize the purpose of social arrangements and the purpose of the state has to change. And I don't see any way around kind of destroying the taboos around these concepts that were historically common before the 20th century, and that were considered anathema after like the 70s. I think those, to borrow the words of R.R. Reno, those strong gods have to return, and I think that's going to happen one way or the other. I think it's better if it happens sooner.
Yeah,
but I think that the problem is that you can't really build, like, for the right, is that you can't really build a coalition that way. Like you and I, Dave, like, we actually do, as we found out, we agree on like a lot of different things. We agree, like, on economics, on like
the power of break the rules.
Right.
Yeah.
But if my marriage were to be dissolved and my husband would be kicked off of my health insurance, and then all of a sudden, like, I've got all this bullshit that I have to deal with.
River's coming for your ass, Dave.
I will become such a libtard. I will be like, vote blue no matter who. I will be like outside. I will be volunteering for like the Nancy Pelosi, head in a jar, like in Futurama presidential campaign. Because you've pushed too far, you pissed me off, and you've made my life more complicated, and that's gonna be. I'm just saying, like, that's the problem that the right is facing. They have built up a like impressive coalition of like the multiracial working class, of sort of like even like some like suburbanite sort of middle class type people who are just like, yeah, I don't want my 5-year-old to be shown like a lynching video in elementary school, or like to like know about sex changes in like pre-K. You got them there, but then if people start with the racial stuff, and they start with the anti-gay stuff, and we're gonna ban abortion nationwide, we're gonna ban birth control, and we're gonna ban IVF, and all of it, which Trump isn't doing that. You went in the opposite direction, thankfully. Like that's gonna really freak out a lot of people, and it's gonna break down that coalition. And it's going to send people into the arms of whoever's waiting in the wings, whether that be President AOC, which I kind of doubt, or whoever else.
Yeah, I mean I'm running out of time, but
super chats right after your response. All right.
I mean there's all sorts of ideas about like, how do we make people whole? How do we buy people out? There are just some necessary things that we need. Like, for instance, I have like this online frenemy. You might have heard of like Walt Bismarck. We've had this debate about like promiscuity, and like men who have multiple women are keeping multiple women in the wings. This has happened many times in the past. Men, like very powerful men, have very frequently kept multiple women. Society can't come out and be like, hey, it's now a sexual free-for-all and polygamy is on the table. Like, that destroys the system. So, like, I guess, there is a compromise here between privacy and buying people out. But, conversely, I'll give a challenge to, the people who are more liberal. If the legacy of the sexual revolution and the LGBTQ revolution, which are the same revolution, let's be honest, it's all part of one sexual revolution. You're absolutely right about that. If the legacy of the LGBT and sexual revolution is to take the populations that perform that revolution and like crash them into the ground genetically so that they no longer exist, the human race will look back on LGBTQ and post-sexual revolution type people, and they'll say, all the traditional norms were completely right about this. They were completely right about like homosexuality was the harbinger of our civilization's doom. And if you want to validate that prophecy, then by all means don't care about like the declining family formation. But if I were gay and I cared about like, I don't know why I would care about like my sexuality continuing, but say I did, I would be highly concerned about family formation crashing, because you're essentially because the prophecy is being fulfilled here.
I'm kind of confused. Wait, what? Like, I mean, both of my parents are straight. Like I don't know. Like the gay people. Like, it's not like there aren't going to be gay people because of gay marriage. Is that what you're saying? I'm kind of confused.
Well, no,
I
think it's more
I'm
about
saying no.
yes,
I'm
you
saying,
can speak for
I'm saying that the public, this is a very common historical point being made, that the public acceptance of non-marital sexual relations, be they what they used to call buggery, be they fornication or any number of things. I'm using old-fashioned terms, right? The public exception of that, or cross-dressing too. The public exception of that is always a precursor to civilization's destruction. Camille Paglia overviews this.
Yeah, that big
Dengler overviews this. Tons of people have said this. This has been a very common historical thing. It's not just one person. And and now all of a sudden, we're experimenting with this exception of like again, these behaviors always go on behind closed doors, but we're experimenting with the public acceptance of this. And now what's happening to family formation? Collapse. It looks like it's going in the same pattern as it has in all civilizations before us. And if you want your larger movement to prove this assertion wrong, then you should care about figuring out some way to preserve the larger body politic and make that a top priority, which I don't see as being a primary position of many in the LGBTQ movement.
So this would be more of a call to action for the influencers within gay society.
Well, yeah, I don't think anyone's going to take this up.
We're gonna make our girlfriends get pregnant. We're gonna be like, girl, go do it. The fag hags. We're gonna make
the
them
thing,
get
right? Like,
knocked
I
up.
don't expect anyone to take me up on this challenge. But this is like the Andrew Sullivan challenge. If Andrew Sullivan cared about gay marriage and the way that he said he did in 2008, he would care a lot about open gay marriages and gay divorce and gay cheating. But he doesn't, and no one does in the gay community. If the LGBT community was what it said it would care about what I just said. But it's not what it says it is, which is why they don't care about what the concern I just brought to the table, which is, it's the test of Solomon here, right? Like, proved you care about the baby that's going to be cut in half with a seminar. If you say you are who you say you are, the
test of
the
Andrew
lack
Solomon.
of caring, it proves that the assertion about what the movement fundamentally is not what it says it is.
And with that, guys, I don't know if River you have a response, because I do want to go to super chats right now. We have a couple of them in here. Let me know.
I mean, I would just say, like, I'm not in the LGBTQ movement or whatever. I'm just like, maybe 100 years ago, me and my husband would just be like, confirmed bachelor roommates or something. But now we're more than that because he needs health insurance. So, it is what it's whatever. Like, I think that a lot of, like, the decline of the American empire is, I think it goes a lot deeper than gay marriage. I think there's a lot of foreign policy decisions that we made that contribute heavily to that. I think there's a lot of economic decisions that we made that contribute heavily to that have, really nothing to do with social issues at all. But let's go to the super chat.
Yeah, but now we have AI, which may become gay-I and figure out a lot of these problems that are going on in the gay community and, set everything straight, in all senses of the term. Anyway, we're going to go to super chats right now, but before that, guys, if you're enjoying the show, subscribe right now, smash that subscribe button, smash that like button, and all the people who are listening to this in this space right now, in the Twitter X space, go into the Jumbotron link where it says watch on YouTube. Click that link, do exactly what I said right now, and lastly, patreon.com/breaktherules. Become a patron today. I cannot stress how important this is. There's going to be a stream with Jason Resiger Johnny coming up very, very soon. It's going to be an exclusive conversation with him about his new book, and if you guys want to be there for that discussion, patreon.com/breaktherules. Become a patron right now, and if you're in the New York City area, which Dave and River, I hope that you, River, you're in Florida.
No longer.
Yes, but you're in Florida,
I will
right?
be soon. I live in Florida. I'm actually moving to New York, like next month.
Hey, there we go.
So
you can be a guest if I would love to have you there in the New York City studio. And if you guys want to be there in person, for River and I and other people that I'm going to have there, $20 patronage gives you that opportunity. There's going to be after parties afterwards. It's going to be great. So patreon.com/breaktherules.
I have to leave now, Lev. I'm so sorry, but I hit my time at 6. Well, maybe I can answer. Is there any super chats directed towards me? If you have like a few minutes.
Yes, over here real quick. From Giovanni Adami, 2 super chats for $5. When you turn the fringe into the norm, mother and children become the fringe. Cities are allowed to become no children allowed zones. And the second one from him, democratic culture turns into people joining cults, and people look for new interests to revolve their identity around. Weedhead, metalhead, hippie. Nothing to answer there. Just wanted to put that out. Lastly, over here, Evolution selects. This is from Ronald McNuggets, $5. Evolution selects against maladaptive culture and doesn't care about gays being high status. Eventually, maladaptive cultures die and healthy values spread. Anything you want to say about any of these? If not, there's 2 more left, and they're real quick.
That's more or less the point I made at the end of my spiel there. So. But hey, I'll have to get going. Thanks so much for having me on.
Dave, where can people find you? I'm sure a lot of them know already, but
yeah, I'm on the channel The Distributist, and I write a blog at Letters from Fiddler's Green. on
Nice.
Substack. All right. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank
And
you
thank
very
you
much,
for
Dave.
talking with me, River. Bye.
And before we go over here, a couple of other super chats from No Name over here. In the Army, for evaluations, you have to support for sharp. All SA claims are true, and EO, equal opportunity, on there, or it counts against you. And then the last one, also, I don't know why his name is not in here. For $2, we're already ruled by idiots. I couldn't agree more. Except that you guys who are listening to this right now, you are not idiots. You are absolutely lovely people, and I am deeply appreciative of the fact that you are here on Break the Rules. And again, for all the new people who don't know what Break the Rules is, I bring on people, much like I had with Dave and River, who come from completely different backgrounds. You know, River from Free Press and Dave from more of the neo-reactionary side of the spectrum, and be able to have conversations like this. You're not going to find that anywhere else. This is the place, so I'm incredibly appreciative of the fact that you guys are here. River, your webcam is off, but I would love for you to say where people could find you, any of that jazz. So let me know if I can hear anything from you, brother. No, I don't know what's going on with River. So, a couple of more things here. Let's do a bit of shout outs to the people here while River, I don't know if he's coming back on or not, or what's going on his end. Oh, okay. He is going to be right back. This. Oh, no, this is the earlier one. Never mind. I have no idea what's happening with River Page right now. Let me just do a couple of shout outs over here. So, we have Post Leftoid. We have Little D. Ronald McNuggets, thank you once again for the super chat. We have Spineleaf, Salmonfish, good old King Salmonfish, great to see you here. And we have Casey Jones, Lil D, and we have Post Leftoid, and we have Roxo Cara. Thank you so much, Roxo, for watching this. Elevated Dust, Alex Berry, Casey Jones. And I think, Sex Freakman. That's my favorite one. Sex Freakman, welcome to BTR. Georgia Swan. Oh, and by the way, I completely forgot while I'm saying all this stuff over here. Why don't you guys go to the Break the Rules Discord? For all the people who are watching this right now, we have a little fan community for all the BTR heads out there. So go there right now. I'm going to post the link to the Discord. I would love to have you guys in there. And we got River Page back on here. So this is the Discord link. Yeah, so River, any final thoughts from this conversation? Did you learn something different from what you were expecting, or let me know?
Yeah, I mean, it was a nice conversation. I'm glad that it didn't become some like Sam Cedar shit show where we're just yelling at each other. Everybody's trying to get like a podcast on the Daily Wire News Network or whatever. So yeah, I had a good time. Is there any like super chats I need to answer?
Let's go over some of these in the beginning here. This is from No Name, I don't know, $5. In the Army for evaluations, you have to support for sharp, in parentheses, all SA claims are true, and equal opportunity on there, or it counts against you. I have no idea how exactly these things work. If you have any thoughts on that, talking about the Army.
Sexual is it?
Yeah,
sexual.
Yeah, I guess sexual assault. Yeah.
Wait, so what is the question again?
So here, I'm going to put it on the screen for everybody to see. In the Army for evaluations, you have to support for sharp. All SA claims are true, and EO, equal opportunity, on there, or it counts against you. I don't know what support for sharp means. I'm not familiar with these sayings here. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, all sexual assault claims are true. I mean, I don't think that's true. I mean, I think people make false.
Well, obviously, but I think that
allegations.
he's talking about the culture that is in the military or has been in the military right now, the way that things are going. But yeah, I don't know. I agree with you though, as far as, and I think Dave also agreed with you, as far as if we have people who are just triggered to act a certain way by the algorithm in order to get more people on board, if they're going to be the next politicians, that's not going to be pretty, because they're only going to listen to their algorithmic base, and they're going to turn off a lot of people that you were talking about earlier. But there is still that great question, which again comes down to, are people not having to survive for their dear life? And is that what we can, like, all the problems that we're talking about here, is that not like at the core of everything? That if we're not living in these bad times, because the times they're not that bad right now, we still have aid that we can get whenever we're, injured, we can go to the hospital. Like, if things aren't as dire, then there's not going to be skin in the game for people to change, much like we were talking about with, Big Gay over here. When it comes to the responsibility question, people like yourself, you're not responsible for what the rest of the people do. But collectively, if there is no need to do any kind of, I don't know if policing your own is the right word here, but if there's no need to do that because there's no pressure to do that, then why would anybody do that for any issue whatsoever? I'm not just talking about, things related to the gay community, but any community whatsoever. If there's no pressure to do anything, why do it? Like, why not just be happy and,
Yeah, well, I mean, I think people kind of overstate, like, yeah, it's true that, like, in our modern era, that, for instance, in the United States, nobody really starves to death, right?
Yeah.
Like, and usually if you, like, read a news story about somebody starving to death, there's usually some kind of, like, mental illness or something involved.
Yeah.
It's not just something that happens. I think that's a good thing. I don't, I don't think that we have to go back to a time where, like, people are on the brink of starvation or just, like, dying on the streets if they don't live their lives completely morally. And it's also, like, it kind of, like, takes the presumption that, like, people have a level of control over their lives that, like, frankly, I don't think that they do.
But isn't that the evolutionary mechanism, though, where the people who do have control over their lives, they end up passing those values to their kids and onwards and upwards versus the people who weren't? And I know that's a very cruel thing to say, obviously, like, now we're in the realm of, like, social Darwinism. But if we are talking about Mother Nature making sure of that as opposed to some top-down governmental system, I could kind of see how that would work over time.
Maybe. I mean, I get kind of, like, weirded out by this stuff in part because of, like, my background. Like, my mom was 16 when she had me. My biological father is maybe like a meth cook, like an East Texas meth cook. And I have, like, a plum media job, and, like, I mean, I a lot of it was, like, luck, a lot of it was being at the right place in the right time, and but, like, I'm a productive stable member of society, and that's not true for a lot of people in my family. It's not true for a lot of people I grew up around, and, like, if you just looked at the way that my genetic history or whatever,
not just genetic, cultural
two
as well.
kids in high school, and then I mean, and that's not to say, like, my mom, to her credit, like, did provide, like, after they broke up, like, she did become really religious, and, like, and that's why I'm, like, I guess, like, a gay person, I'm not as hostile to religion as some people are. Like, I think it probably saved my life in some ways. Like, just because my mom really did go out of her way to, like, keep us away from drugs and from a lot of the sort of
and that was
depravities.
religion. You'd say that was religion that contributed to her being as she was with you.
Yeah, but it's a double-edged sword a little bit too, because obviously our relationship is complicated because I'm gay. She also has a complicated relationship with my brother, who is religious, but he's sort of an interesting guy. He converted to Greek Orthodoxy. We're very similar in a lot of ways. He's, like, very intellectual, very heady, but he was, like, on an oil rig reading Dostoevsky, and he, like, decided to convert to Greek Orthodoxy. And he's, like, not
Many
on Twitter
such
or
cases.
anything. He's not, like, he's not, like, one of these, like, people who's, like, writing, like, a vibe shift or whatever. Like, it was a true, like, genuine thing. And, like, because she's such a Protestant, she's like, this isn't even, like, real Christianity.
Wow. Yeah.
So it kind of, like, creates these dynamics to where, like, if you can't really, like, fit into the mold, then it creates problems. But that being said, like there is something to be said about structure and about whatever. But like I think people put way too much an emphasis on genetics in a way that I think, like, for obviously historical reasons, is like kind of scary and can lead to a lot of like bad things.
Sure.
And I also think that it often just wrong. Like, like there are a lot of like really intelligent people who are born into like nothing and like are able to overcome that. And there's also a lot of people like my dad, who was a meth dealer. Like his parents are millionaires, and he's a fuck up. And like that, it's at the end of the day, I am still kind of a Protestant. I still do kind of believe in like an individualistic sort of like moral compass where ultimately you are in control of your own life. And that includes, in my opinion, the ability to fuck up your life. That's why I'm not, I'm against kids transitioning. I think it's, we don't let kids get tattoos. Why would we let them do like hormones? Like, it just seems crazy to me. I don't think that like,
This is common sense stuff, like any rational.
Right. But if you are 25 or 30 or 40, I'm not going to stop a woman from getting a boob job or a nose job. And if you know what I mean? Like it to me, it's like, it's cosmetic surgery at the end of the day. And like, if that's what you want to do, then you have a right to do it. It may fuck up your life. But people kind of, I think kind of have a right to do that. And you can't really stop them anyway. Like they'll find a way. Like before a lot of these sort of like trans surgeries and stuff, in a lot of places they were illegal, and like people would just go to like Thailand or go to Germany, or like if people really want to do something, like you're not going to stop them.
I'm not as concerned about that. I agree with you. Like when it comes to adults doing it, it's not that big of an issue, but it's more of this thing about whether society can keep itself, from whether it can keep the ship of civilization afloat as opposed to drowning, not because of, somebody decided to put on a dress, but more about whether people have enough of a responsibility. We're talking about, like the iPad baby generation and onwards, whether people do have enough responsibility to be able to actually manage government correctly, to be able to pay their bills on time, to be able to do all of these mundane things that, like, for example, if we're talking about culture here, there are places in the world that are full of garbage. Trash is everywhere. All of those little pieces of trash are, at the end of the day, decisions that an individual person had to make. Do I put this item here or do I put it there? And I'm not going to say that these are, genetic things. We can just say cultural. Like there are cultures that value cleanliness more than other cultures. And these are decisions that people make. So what exactly reinforces people to make the right decision versus the wrong decision? To me, that's way, way more important than, any of the sexual things. But I do think that maybe they are related in the sense that certain cultures, they have had more of this emphasis on law and order and honor. And, the Greeks, they had a lot of homosexuality going on too, but it wasn't about the homosexuality. It was about, proving oneself as being worthy of the affection of the gods. It was about like these higher ideals. Like all the other stuff, it was there, but it wasn't the focus. The concern now is that, well, what are people living for? If they're just living for, various kind of sexual-oriented things, and that's it, just for pleasure, that's not enough. That's not going to fill people up. So that is going to be something we're going to have to contend with. But I agree with you. I don't think we're going to be able to solve this through having like a top-down structure, trying to artificially jam people into these things, because kind of it's over, I think, in that sense. Now we have to look forward to AI and, the spectral revolution and various innovations. Like, if you believe that this world we're living in, like, you are not atheistic, right? Like, you believe that there are certain higher powers out there, certain things that we're not necessarily aware of, or am I further away from where you are?
I don't know. I guess like agnostic would be the best description of my beliefs. I mean, I grew up very religious. I still have like, I don't know, like if I hear like an old Baptist hymn or something at the right time, like I'll get a little teary eyed, you know, like it's you know, I have like an appreciation for it. But I just think like, despite like what everybody says, like America is still kind of a very like Protestant country. Even the way that like the Catholics act is kind of Protestant. You know, the schisms. Everybody on Twitter is like a niche. You know, they're like arguing about all this like mundane. You know, that's very Protestant.
Yeah.
You know, they're not just like we like the Pope and you know whatever. They're like we hate the Pope. He's the anti-Pope, and you know.
So it's more Apollonian, if you will, like you know the Apollo versus Dionysus. I always found Catholicism to be a little bit more festive, a little bit more Dionysian,
Sure,
like with
yeah.
the wine and all of that. And Apollo is supposed to be more of this like autistic, analytical type of thing going on, categorizing everything, much like you would categorize the different genders and having like the different patterns of flags to represent those genders. Like I do see what you're talking about, River. Yeah, like there is that kind of aspect.
And even within like the you know, within like that framework, like I think there's still like a big focus on like individualism and like personal liberty and like a skepticism of the state that comes out of the Protestant Congregationalist framework, where like, you know, the way I grew up, the church that you literally go to, like that is the church. There is no higher authority in the Baptist religion than that. Like, and idea, like there's, you vote on everything. Like every man, woman, child who's a member of the church, you vote on things. And like, there's a sort of like, for lack of a better word, like communitarian aspect to all of it, like a sort of de facto like social insurance, and like it's a communitarian in some ways, but it's also very independent, and like that breathes like that. Those sort of like people who thought that way, who like perceive their like religious and social lives that way, where it's like you help your neighbor, but also like your literal neighbor, the person close to you, and you don't want people in your personal business really. There's like a very select group of people to whom you're morally accountable, and outside of that group is kind of like, who cares? I think that impulse is like still really present in America in some ways, and I think that, you know, part of the reason that we've been good at assimilating people is the consumer culture, as Dave was talking about, but I think it's also that, like the sort of individualism, and the idea of a religion being something that's both important, but it's also somewhat private. Like this is a very Protestant idea, and that like a skepticism of it being entwined with the state in like a very, very doctrinaire and like specific sort of way. You know, evangelicals might be like, well, you know, we live in a Christian country, but if it were like, for instance, if they were to go after like IVF or birth control or something like that, there would be massive cleavages, because people still, you know, like growing up the way I did, like there would be sermons against abortion, but nobody really ever talked about birth control. Nobody really ever talked about IVF. Like those were viewed as like personal things that like, you know, there's no real, the Bible doesn't really say anything about them, and so it's kind of like up to you how you feel about it, and you can figure that out yourself. And even within the church, there would be people with different views, and like that was fine.
It's a very high trust society. There is trust that the people who are your neighbors are allowed to have the same level of responsibility as you do. They're not going to go nuts with that responsibility. They're not going to forsake this common, you know, level that a lot of people are on. Like that's something that reminds me a little bit of, let's say, I don't know, like certain Eastern countries too, like Japan, for instance. Like there is this idea like, oh, okay, guys, we're like in this together. I trust you are going to act this way, and I'm going to act this way, and we'll be good. I don't know if the rest of the world functions like that much. You know what I mean? Like that's the big concern here as far as any kind of people who come from a completely different culture coming over. You know, like that's a
Yeah,
big ask.
I don't know, but I think that, but then like I feel like whenever I meet like a second generation like Muslim guy, for example, they're just kind of like they listen to like rap music usually. Like, they're like wearing like basketball shorts and just like they don't really care that you're gay. And like it's like um there doesn't seem to be like we do seem to be assimilating people still like far better than the Europeans are, and maybe that's the consumer culture. Maybe it's I think actually a lot of what it is more is that America is so big that you don't quite have like the ethnic enclaves. I mean, you do in some cities, but like for the most part, like if you are, say, an Indian or a Pakistani or whoever, and you move uh, to just some town in America, you're gonna end up being surrounded both like at school or at work or wherever by like black people, white people, Jews, Christians, whatever. And like people I think have a desire to get along generally unless they're like mentally
Sure.
ill. And so they're going to smooth out some edges, and maybe they have some opinions that, you know, they wouldn't say at work, but they'll keep them at home. And it's not even like an oppression thing. It's like you know, this is
Yeah,
just
it's a double-edged
politeness
sword
and
though, because it does also create the famous bystander effect, which is very often seen in places like New York City, where a guy's being, thrown off of the train track. I mean, thrown off of the platform into the train tracks, and the train's coming. And it's like people are, they don't want to get involved. Nobody wants to be sued. Nobody wants to have any trouble. It's this laziness of not being accountable for the things that are around you because you don't have any skin in the game to be accountable in the first place. Like, that's the other side of the coin there. Like, yeah, people are going to be nice and gentle and safe, and, they'll express a lot of the opinions that shows them to be civilized people, no problem from us, everything's cool. But when it comes to the upkeep, then when it comes to actually being hard when you're supposed to be hard, like that's really a big question. Like, are we
yeah.
going to be having that quality?
I mean, New York is not America. I think that's
Yeah, that's true.
that's also like a big part of this is like a lot of the the discourse that you see coming out is you're dealing with a city that really is a lot more like a European city than an American one.
But even in terms of like the suburbs, is there still that same quality that people like Dave or people around him are, you know, bemoaning the absence of? Because it does seem to be like what you're saying right now. Like, I live in a suburban-ish place, and everybody like waves to each other, but there still isn't like this kind of cohesive community. Like, yeah, some people go to church, but at least the impression has been that there's a lot less of this cohesiveness versus what happened in the past, and in the end, it's gonna bite us in the ass. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like we're definitely more atomized than ever, and I think a lot of that is due to some of it is social. I think less of it is immigration. I think a lot of because if you look at like the heyday of like social organizations where people did go to church all the time. They had like unions, and the unions weren't just like a piece of paper that you signed. It was like you had union halls and dances, and like people would go and hang out. And
Yeah.
they had all these civic organizations where you would join. Was that book Bowling Alone? Like people would join bowling leagues or do whatever. Like a lot of that stuff was happening in like these very ethnically diverse like Midwest cities, and I don't. I think a lot of it is one technology. People are on their phones all the time. They're in their house. They're like, you, the consumer culture is like sick. I don't know how you beat it, but like, people are your social interactions mostly come online now for a lot of people. There is like an increasing lack of like third spaces where it's like, oh, you every Thursday or Friday or whatever, you go and you meet your buddies at the bar.
Now it's Discord servers, like the Break the Rules Discord server.
Exactly.
There we go. No, you're absolutely right, River. It's you aren't as pessimistic about it as probably other people are. You still see there being somewhat of a glue. One difference I could say is people who I don't know who that was. People
That's my
who.
husband.
Oh,
Sorry,
well,
he's grabbing something.
no problem. Nice see him there. The people who I've talked with who are, let's say, in construction, with what's happening right now at the house, I've been talking to a lot of people from that world, and they talk about how in school, their kids speak with a lot of the, like the Mexican kids, and the Mexican kids, they don't speak a lick of English at all. Their parents didn't teach them anything. It's like a completely isolated civilization, yet they are still like the kids, the little kids, they are able to like understand and communicate, in like their particular ways despite the language barrier. So that does happen, but still the fact that you have people who are completely isolated and they're still, nice people, kind people, whatever, that is not something that the immigrants, at least to my understanding, were facing in the early 20th century, where people from the Pale of Settlement, like the Jewish people and the Italians and so on and so forth, when they migrated, they still looked up to this waspish ideal of like, this is the culture, this is what we have to integrate to. Like, yeah, we could still have our little festivals and things like that, but eventually we have to start moving in this very specific direction that, if you were to read, Albion Seed, it would talk about, how all these people came to America and this, like, the culture that they created. Like, that's what we have to merge into in order to become, the land of all of these, Gilded Age bosses that are able to create all these beautiful bridges and factories. And you know what I mean? Like, that was the idea, like growing into something greater than, maybe like the little village that you came from, as opposed to just staying in that village mentally.
Well, yeah, but like, wasn't that kind of like, there were cleavages, like there were people who were like, no, we want to maintain, like that's why you have like still have like Hasidics in New York, right? It's like,
yeah, what are you gonna do?
Not all of the Jews were like, we want to become WASP. Like some of them definitely did it. And even like, I remember like the last time I was in Chicago, I saw something. It was like Polish Citizens Union or something like that. Like the Polacks, like they had like some like bingo hall or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
no, I mean you're right. There are those things like the Irish policemen. There are certain enclaves that people end up being into. Italian mafia. There are these enclaves, but still, despite the enclavage, there was more of an emphasis. I could be wrong, but it just seems like there was more of an emphasis on what is considered to be the culture of, like these high people, the culture of these people with the top hats, that if we do want to get somewhere in life, this is the kind of, Ivy League, professional culture that we have to yearn for and strive for. And some people say, no, I'm cool with being here in this enclave, but they still understood that there was a difference between like where they were and like this higher thing to aim for.
But aren't people still doing that? I don't know. Like my mom works for an Indian doctor, like Indian immigrant. And like him and his wife wanted like all of their kids to have like arranged marriages, and they all grew up. They were like all born and raised in America in Texas, and they were like, we're not doing that. And they all like, I think one of them wound up marrying another like daughter of Indian immigrants. Another one married. They had like 3 sons, and like the other 2 like married white women, I think, and. They were like, I think they're all like Methodists now. I don't know. Like to me, like I don't know. It seems like some of the assimilation is still happening. Like when I suppose there are like some parts of it, like every once in a while, maybe you'll catch like a woman in a burqa or, but I've never seen like somebody who was like born in America and lived here their whole life and like wound up like not speaking English by the time they're like out of high school or something. Like I think that's pretty rare.
I agree with you. I mean, this is a comment that is interesting from, I can't pronounce his name, very historical native-born Americans literally firebombed Irish and German neighborhoods. True. By comparison, our modern ethnic immigration challenges are ridiculously tame. Yes and no. Like, I agree with you and I agree with him. the differentiation, I would say, has to do with what exactly is the aim of the good, sophisticated life, and if that is still there. You're saying it is. Personally, when I look at it, I mean, look at Barry Weiss having to leave the New York Times. I don't find the New York Times culture that she left to be particularly sophisticated in the same sense as like these great aims that I was talking about earlier. I wish the very best for the University of Austin. I hope that it succeeds tremendously. But when it comes to that question of, is it enough to say, well, I'm not going to practice these certain religious relics from my ancestors now that I'm here in America? Is that enough, or is it not? Could it be that enough in this case, maybe I'm being too harsh of a critic here, but maybe enough would be to have more of this emphasis on reading, the greatest philosophers and having this Aristotelian idea of the good life and becoming a pillar of one's community that has a way of influencing other people to, act in a much more sophisticated civilizational way, whatever that means. I know I'm being vague right now about the details because it's a lot of things to calculate and figure out. But I hope that I'm painting a clearer picture of this than I may have been in the beginning. You tell me.
Yeah, I mean, so what are we talking about here? Are we talking about like the elephant in the room? It's like Muslims, right?
Oh, that's definitely up there. But that's up there specifically because within Islam, you cannot have a secular government and Islam at the same time. They contradict each other. But that's like a very specific thing there.
Yeah, because I mean, when it comes to the other ones, I mean, like I said, like Hispanics, like they're either Catholic or like Pentecostal. So,
but I don't even mean religion. I don't mean religion. I mean more philosophy, which is very different. I mean more of the idea that I could give you this example. When we take a look at the ancient Greeks, the time when we had all of this philosophy, Heraclitus, Anaximander, and Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all of our favorites. When we had that transition to ancient Greek philosophy, it was also the same time that within ancient Greek art, you started having the kind of art that is able to perceive the human body from the outside. What I mean by this is if we were to compare the art of the Sumerians and the ancient Egyptians, it wasn't art. It was like iconography that had a specific purpose. And one thing that I think was going on there, and there's people who would also agree with this, like Julian Jayne, who wrote that book about the bicameral mind, how the brain was split in half, and you received the signals from one half that you thought was like the voice of the gods. So the idea here is that it wasn't that they were unable to they were not allowed to draw things in a different way. Like you wouldn't see like an Egyptian hieroglyphic that all of a sudden decided to be rebellious and just have like a front view like this. No, like they were all in profile. So the idea here is that it's not that they weren't allowed to draw things differently. They couldn't. They were physically incapable of drawing things differently than they were because they were like in this very specific hive mind that cannot see the world differently from the way that they were depicting it. And all of a sudden now you got this break within philosophy, of these ancient Greek people that started thinking about, wait a minute, what is this? What is going on here? Who are we? And same thing with their art. They started depicting the human body as it actually is. So they were able to escape the matrix in a way. So my point here is that when you're asking about, well, what does it mean to integrate or what does it mean to have like this higher end society? I mean more of that. And I can't define it in any other better way, except that I see too many hive minds, especially now with all of the things that are going on in the internet with these algorithms. Too many people are hooked in to the matrix, as it were, and they're going the opposite direction from where the ancient Greeks were.
Yeah, well, I mean, isn't the problem more the internet then? Because you could definitely see like a native-born American who is like addicted to the internet being like somehow less American or like more weird or more outside of the mainstream than like an immigrant or like the child of an immigrant.
I mean, it's
right?
it's a double-edged sword. I wouldn't say it's just the internet though, because you had cultures that were extremely hive-minded. Like they were doing certain rituals all the time. They weren't thinking about it. They weren't questioning it. So they had an internet too. In fact, if we look back at the archaic Greeks, like before philosophy, when you had, the Homeric times, wonderful guest of the show, who, by the way, we're going to be on Patreon with Jason Giorgiani very soon. Jason Giorgiani, amazing philosopher, a good friend of the show. He talked about how these archaic Greeks, when they had all these Homeric stories, it was like the internet for them. That was their internet. They were connected, psychically connected to all these stories that weren't just about like these various legends of Odysseus and such. They taught them like how to build ships. They taught them how to organize society in a certain way. And they were in the dream state, according to him, following all of these things. And it was almost like rap music. Like they were rapping out these stories that they were talking about over the campfire and that integrated into their, collective consciousness. So that's what I mean is the common thing, I think, for most people in the world, like having that hive mind state. But I think that like the founding fathers generation, among many other people, were able to escape that state of being and look at things, from a broader point of view. And I think it's that energy that was able to build up the kind of civilization that I think a lot of us take for granted today. And that's more of the quality that I want to see.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think like you have to think about the context in which the founders, arose. Like there was a sort of parallel like Enlightenment thing happening in Europe. They're also in this like frontier environment. There's like material conditions where like they don't really feel connected to England. They don't really feel like this king is like this faraway person they've never seen really, and like, I guess our equivalent to that would be the internet in some way, like that is like an equal destabilizer of the status quo. And the thing is that it can cut in all sorts of directions. Like you did have white guys joining ISIS. like white guys from Alabama radicalizing themselves online.
And also gingers converting to Islam. That apparently is a thing.
It seems to be a lot of them. So it's kind of, there's also like, it's like, I think there actually is like less of a hive mind now than there probably was like 30 years ago. It's, and that's kind of like the uneasy thing about it is that you have all these, the internet has created all sorts of different types of brains now, and like it's like de-assimilating America in some ways. Like it's like is that many different brains though, as opposed to there being like big chunks that we could recognize, and then the little subcultures are more of like these moons that are very diverse, but they're not that big versus like the bigger, because like I could take a big chunk out of like the MAGA people, the MAGA boomers, how they act, what they look like. It all is like one complete package with a bow on top. I cannot say the same thing for yourself. I cannot say the same thing for people like Barry Weiss or for people like Dave Greene, who we were talking to here. Like these are more of the, I mean, I know like the whole NPC thing, people may not like it that much, but I kind of see there being this differentiation between people who are on the internet, more of this hive mind, you kind of could predict what they're going to say, versus people who are able to kind of like step back. And yeah, they're going to be in their own little subculture, but it's still going to be a lot more diverse and maybe even open to different possibilities because they're not stuck to something that has a lot more gravity to it. I don't know, but we're going to be concluding this soon. Any final thoughts on that? Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible that it's always been that way, and that it's just that normally, like, you didn't hear what the NPCs had to say because they had no way to talk in like a public forum on the way that they do on the internet now. So like, yeah, like me, Barry, whoever, like we do this for a living. It's kind of our job to like think about things sort of deeply and to like really interrogate like our beliefs and like look at the way the world's working and try to figure it out. And then like you have all these other people who that's not their job and they're just like logging on and they're like, oh, and like like that type of person has probably always existed. You just didn't see them every day in the way that you do now.
Well, they were experts at particular things. Like if they were, let's say, working on the farm, they would know far more than any of us about things like when it's going to rain. Like they would have probably known about these things, hours in advance, just with, like the sixth sense or something like that, like in no way am I denigrating people to say, well, there's like, like these NPCs people and then there's like these smart. No, like everybody had their own role to play. But now again, like with, democracy and all of this access to information, I think a lot of these people, especially like with, Russia versus Ukraine, that's a really big one for me because I'm from St. Petersburg, from Russia, and I am very much against their government and against Putin. And I see a lot of the right-wing people who are now, I wouldn't say they're pro-Putin, but they're definitely pro-isolationism, I think because they're reacting to, Biden and the Vogue magazine cover with Zelensky on it and all of that. So they're just like, it's very easy for me to like put them in a box and say, okay, you guys are reacting this way because you are just being fed this information this very particular way and reacting to it. Maybe it would have been a better life if they were just like working on a farm somewhere and honing those particular instincts and not really being a factor in U.S. foreign policy. I don't know. Like that, maybe that's a controversial thing to say, and it doesn't denigrate them. It says like not everybody is meant to analyze certain things because you might end up being just a tube to take this piece of information and regurgitate it back and to feed into certain things that you haven't really had the time to research.
Yeah. No, I agree. And there's like, everything has become sort of culture war in a way, like even the Ukraine war. Like I think there is like a fair point to be made about like the United States has no strategic interest in Ukraine. It's a, you could say like, oh, it's a quagmire. This is like Russia's sphere of influence. Like if we get involved with this, like it could be really dangerous because it's like two nuclear armed superpowers basically getting into a proxy war, and I oppose it because of that. Like that I buy. Being like, oh, I hate Zelensky and whatever, like that's a very like reactive sort of impulse that has kind of come to define like everything now, to where, theoretically there's some sort of intellectual point behind it, but in practice it's just like the people that I dislike this thing, and so therefore I also dislike it, or it has some cultural connotation that repulses me, and so therefore I'm like, you see this all the time where like people see like I don't know, a like visibly gay person or like a black person or whatever, and then they start making all of these like assumptions. Like I wrote something about like, anytime anything happens now, it's like everybody blames DEI, especially God forbid like there's a woman or like a racial minority.
By the way, with the airplanes, I found out that that's not going to work anyway, because the insider I know in the airline industry says that pretty much all of the pilots are wealthy, because you have to have a lot of disposable income in order to even have the time to do all the training and all of that. So that's just like an aside. That's,
I don't think it pays that well either, weirdly.
yeah, no, but they're probably set for life. Maybe they just like airplanes a lot. That could also be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, River, we are going to be concluding the show right now. I want to thank all the people who are watching on YouTube as well as the X Spaces. The experiment has been tremendously successful. We were able to get the microphones to work in both, and so we're going to be continuing this with other shows. I would love for River to have you back, and when you're in New York, please let's get in touch, and I would definitely love to have you there in the BTR studio. Make a lot of great things happen. I really appreciate you being here. Same with Dave. And guys, thank you so much for watching. Golin, thank you so much for watching. You are the MVP. Really appreciate you, man. Ethnat Atheist, thank you for watching. Spineleaf, Holy Marmot. I love marmots, by the way. That's like a separate thing. There is this Japanese guy whose name is Dr. Marmot on Twitter. If you guys get a chance, look up Dr. Marmot. He's this Japanese guy whose father unfortunately passed away, but his father, like the way his father acted, reminded him of like the marmots when he started seeing these marmot videos. So he got this inspiration to go to China and adopt the marmots. And, he learned a lot of bad things, like how corrupt and how horrible the marmot breeding industry in China is, how they treat these poor creatures really, really badly. But he was able to get marmots to like 2 Himalayan marmots. No, I don't remember. But anyway, he got a bunch of marmots, 3 marmots, bunch, to Japan. Now they're living there. Check out his Instagram and YouTube and Twitter. And it's great. Like, I really love animals and how now we have this nice partnership with these animals and we're helping them out, and they're living time of their life. Check out this raccoon as well on Meerkat Chief on Instagram. There's this fat raccoon that everybody loves. Everybody's like rubbing his belly all the time, and he's like laying there and having the time of his life. So that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Guys, thank you so much for watching. River Page, where can people find you?
You can find me at the Free Press. I write a column usually every week. I do our newsletter almost every day. So you can subscribe to that, and you can find me on Twitter at river_is_nice.
Excellent. And guys, if you want to support the show, once again, patreon.com/breaktherules. $20 patrons are going to be able to be audience members in the New York City studio. We're going to go out for drinks afterwards, part of the after party. And I have a really, really sweet roof in the condo of where the studio is. So when the weather is good, we're going to go up to the roof, have a great time. Really appreciate your support. We bring all the people together, River. Now you have this connection with David, and I think this is just the beginning, because these are the conversations that need to happen. We cannot be as divided as we were. He will not divide us. You remember the whole... Yeah. Guys, thank you so much for watching. You could find me at LevPo on X, Twitter, whatever. River Page, thank you so much. Take care. Have a good night.
Thanks for having me. Good night.
Bye-bye. Here we go. And also...